Subcommittee on Highways and Transit will come to order. I ask unanimous consent the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. Again, that's documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Today's hearing begins our subcommittee's activity in the 119th Congress. We have a number of new members of Congress on this subcommittee, so I want to welcome them as well as my colleagues who have previously served. I'm honored to serve as chairman of the Highways and Transit Subcommittee, and I look forward to working with Chairman Graves and committee members as we begin a very active Congress. The 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IJA, included provisions to authorize our nation's highway programs until September 30th, 2026. As we begin the important work of reauthorizing our nation's surface transportation programs, this committee will build upon the bipartisan successes of the 118th Congress, and I look forward to working with Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, Ranking Member Norton, the rest of my colleagues in the Trump administration to produce a bipartisan, member-driven bill that revitalizes our nation's infrastructure. It's important that we hear from those working and interfacing directly with these programs to ensure congressional intent is being followed. Our highway network ensures the safe and efficient movement of people and freight and improves economic competitiveness. In fact, the United States transportation system is comprised of 4.2 million miles of public roads and almost 620,000 bridges. This infrastructure maintains our supply chain with the free-flowing movement of goods across our country. To ensure goods move efficiently and keep costs low for American goods and services, we must continue to invest in our nation's most vital infrastructure, and that, of course, is our highways and bridges. The highways, roads, and bridges linking our communities and states, supported through existing core formula programs, are the foundation of our economy. To keep projects moving, continued flexibility for our state departments of transportation is imperative. States know their unique transportation needs and how to best address them. We must continue to uphold and abide by this hallmark principle in the next highway bill. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today who will be able to share what's working, what's not, and why a simple extension of the current law would be detrimental for state DOT's planning of multi-year projects. While I believe most here today understand the urgent need to address our nation's most pressing infrastructure concerns, we must also recognize we don't have an unlimited checkbook. IJA authorized and appropriated $365 billion for highway programs. Within the 5-year reauthorization for highway programs, the law increased funding by 62% compared to the 5-year average of the previous bill, the 2015 FAST Act. Therefore, you're looking at a staggering increase, obviously, there. On top of reauthorizing existing programs, IJA created new discretionary programs, including efforts to prioritize electric vehicle charging infrastructure, cut carbon emissions, and support active transportation projects like bike lanes, among others. So with our national debt surpassing $36 trillion and adding an additional 70,000 per minute, we must scrutinize and streamline programs to address waste and ensure our tax dollars are focused on reliable infrastructure that will help grow our GDP. We must also have a frank discussion about the solvency of the Highway Trust Fund, the main funding source for highway projects. Since 2008, Congress has transferred approximately $275 billion to cover the shortfall of revenues as expenditures have grown. Highway funding relies on a user pays principle. It's pretty simple. You purchase fuel to fill up your vehicle to use the roads, and the fuel taxes collected from that purchase go into the Highway Trust Fund. However, electric vehicles, which are often heavier than their conventional counterparts because of the weight of their batteries, do not pay into the Highway Trust Fund. It is wholly unfair and that an entire segment of users doesn't contribute to the roads and bridges they use. This won't address the greater solvency issue, obviously, but we must rectify this so all users are treated fairly and contributing to the systems on which they rely. Now, continued investment in our nation's highway network translates to a strong economy and improved quality of life for all Americans. And so I look forward to today's discussion. I now recognize Ranking Member Holmes Norton for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank Subcommittee Chair Rouser for holding this hearing on the nation's surface transportation programs and to express my eagerness for this subcommittee to get started in the 119th Congress. America's roads are an important part of our larger transportation system. We rely on millions of miles of public roads and bridges, including 1 million miles of federal aid highways to move goods and people across the country. These roads, in unison with other surface transportation systems like transit, rail, and pedestrian and biking infrastructure, form the foundation for our economy. In November 2021, Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, representing a historic investment in the nation's transportation system. This law not only reauthorized our surface transportation programs through fiscal year 2026, but also provided $1.2 trillion, that's $trillion, to maintain, improve, and rebuild our infrastructure. Within our subcommittee's jurisdiction, this law included $355 billion for highways, $108 billion for transit, $43 billion for multimodal grants, and $13 billion for highway and motor carrier safety. Since then, the Department of Transportation's hard work has resulted in the announcement of almost $600 billion for over 66,000 projects. This funding has gone toward projects in communities all across the country, creating jobs, improving safety, accessibility, and promoting a cleaner, greener transportation system. Now, with the end of bipartisan infrastructure law's 5-year reauthorization in sight, this subcommittee must ensure these investments continue. As this subcommittee considers the next surface transportation bill, it must prioritize safety. Make no mistake, we are living through a public health crisis. Over 40,000 people died on our roadways in 2023. Remarkably, this number represents a 5% improvement from where we were in 2021. The brunt of these deaths have been borne by pedestrians, cyclists, and communities of color. We cannot allow this trend to continue. We cannot allow any more families to be devastated. The bipartisan infrastructure law took safety seriously. For example, the Safe Streets and Drugs for All program was established to help local governments plan and build out projects to improve safety and reduce roadway safety deaths. Though through this program, 75% of the nation's population will be covered by these safety plans. However, there is still work to be done to improve safety. We now need to support our local governments by continuing these locally driven efforts and connecting them with funding to build out these safety plans. Any reauthorization legislation this subcommittee considers must make meaningful progress on this issue. Safety is non-negotiable. We also must work to continue mitigating the impact of our transportation system on the environment, especially from gas-powered vehicles. Transportation is the largest source of emissions in the United States, and our transportation policies and programs must be reformed accordingly. Expanding access to transit, walking, and biking is a critical part of the solution. Thank you to our witnesses today. I appreciate your input regarding the needs of the nation's transportation system and look forward to our discussion about the challenges ahead. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize Mr. Larson for his statement.
Thank you, Chair Rouser, and welcome to the subcommittee, and thank you for holding this hearing to kick off the Surface Transportation Reauthorization. The title of this hearing series, America Builds, says it all. And right now, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, America is building again, and we need to keep it going. Building transportation doesn't just mean highways. Investments in transit, in rail, in ports, and airports keep America moving as well. I look forward to future hearings on how transit agencies and rail networks sustain our economy and how the Surface Transportation Reauthorization impacts these modes. BIL funds are supporting over 85,000 new transportation projects in every congressional district. The BIL helped create 1.6 million construction and manufacturing jobs across this country. These jobs with good wages, benefits, and working conditions are driving the low 4.1% unemployment rate while modernizing our infrastructure. That's why it is unfathomable to me that on the first day of this administration, the President signed an executive order to pause this progress, putting millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and thousands of projects located in every congressional district of this country at risk. No committee is more bipartisan than this committee, and the pain that this part of the executive order is equally bipartisan. So I want to call on every member of the full committee to look at the projects in your district, the jobs in your district, and remind the administration of this bipartisan pain that this will cause your districts. Instead, we should be working together across the aisle and with the incoming administration to celebrate the economic and safety benefits of transportation projects. To ensure these benefits continue to flow to our constituents, we need to engage local partners in the next reauthorization. And last week, we heard the testimony of Mayor Pro Tem Fuentes from Austin, Texas, who reiterated the important role that local governments play in our transportation networks. Local governments own 77% of the nation's roadways, 50% of the nation's bridges, and 46% of urban and rural transit providers. Over 90% of BIL highway and bridge dollars go out by formula to the states. Yet, Mayor Fuentes' testimony noted that the majority of car trips are local, and freight trips often begin and end on local roads. This disconnect is why Congress prioritized some BIL funds to be distributed via competitive grants. These grants ensure the communities have a chance to secure funding and advance projects that may not be prioritized by state DOTs. These grants play a big role in delivering locally driven projects. And just this month, DOT announced $5 billion for more than 560 transportation projects in every state, funding projects important to members of Congress, governors, mayors, state legislators, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, all of which are put in danger due to this administration's misguided executive order on transportation funding. Just since 2022, I've helped secure over $103 million in raise grants for my district. And these projects are developed, designed, and driven by local input and support. And I could tell that story 434 other times for every district in this country. Thanks to these discretionary grants, communities in my district can get to work on projects rebuilding Linwood's Poplar Way Bridge, replacing the Lummi Island Ferry, or modernizing Skagit Transit's Operations Center or the Port of Bellingham's shipping terminal. The BIL also made its mark on the types of projects states and local governments are building. The Reconnecting Communities pilot program is funding projects that make it easier for people to get to work or school. These projects support local economic activity and improve safety for residents in areas that have been separated by past highway projects, bringing communities back together. The BIL established a $5 billion mega grant program to fund large, complex infrastructure projects like the Brent Spence Bridge in Kentucky. that has long been delayed due to insufficient funding. It also created the $9 billion Bridge Investment Program, which is helping to repair and replace aging bridges that support key freight routes throughout the country. And finally, the BIL is investing in safety projects to help tackle the safety crisis in this country. So we noted with more than 40,000 people dying in motor vehicle crashes every single year. The BIL boosted the Highway Safety Improvement Program and is providing, for the first time, direct funding to cities, counties, and rural communities to save lives. Investments including Safe Streets and Roads for All grants empower your local communities to plan and execute projects to improve how your constituents can get around more safely. Keeping our transportation system in good repair, keeping it resilient, keeping it safe, and keeping it ready for future rate and passenger demand requires ongoing investment. I'm ready to make that investment. We're ready to make that investment. Let's keep it going. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to your testimony. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Before we get going full force here, I want to make a few observations that you may find of interest. There are a total of 55 members on this subcommittee, and if you're wondering how that compares with other full committees, if this were a full committee, we would be we would rank second in terms of total membership, only behind Armed Services. So that gives you a little sense of the width and breadth of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and particularly the interest and importance of this subcommittee. So I would like to welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. Briefly, I'd like to take a moment to explain our lighting system to our witnesses. Pretty simple to understand. Green is go, yellow is wrap it up, and red is stop as soon as you possibly can. So you'll see those lights as you begin. I ask unanimous consent the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. Now, I want to go through and introduce the witnesses that we have here today. We have Mr. Jim Timon, who is with the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. We have Mr. Dallinger, who's with the Cargo Transporters Incorporated, representing American Trucking Associations. And then we have Ms. Janet Kavanaugh, who is with Vulcan Materials Company. And then we have Matthew Colvin with the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. With that, Mr. Timon, you are now recognized for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser, and congratulations on your appointment to the most important subcommittee in Congress. Chairman, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding today's important hearing on our nation's highways and their role in moving people and freight. My name is Jim Timon, and I serve as the Executive Director of the American Association of State Highways and Transportation Officials, or AASHTO. I'm honored to testify on behalf of our state DOTs in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. This morning, I'll speak to the surface transportation aspects of IIJA. And while this hearing is focused on highway programs, AASHTO recognizes that federal transit and passenger rail programs remain crucial to supporting our entire transportation system. My testimony will speak to IIJA's successes and challenges and the upcoming surface transportation reauthorization. So let's start with the successes of IIJA. One of the most important successes in IIJA has been the ability for state DOTs to take formula dollars provided in IIJA and utilize those dollars to deliver tangible projects and benefits quickly. State DOTs are able to do this through their long-range plans and capital programs developed in partnership with MPOs and localities. As a result, state DOT formula dollars are spending out on projects in your communities at a faster rate than any other transportation project category in IIJA. When funding is distributed to states by formula, this is the most efficient and effective way to create jobs, have an impact on the economy, and improve our transportation system. Another area of progress under IIJA has been highway safety. In 2021, there were over 43,000 fatalities on our nation's roadways. IIJA provided funding and policies that enabled state DOTs to accelerate deployment of proven roadway safety strategies and innovative countermeasures. According to NHTSA, since 2021, roadway fatalities have declined for 10 consecutive quarters, even as people are driving more miles. In 2023, there were about 41,000 roadway fatalities, still a staggering and unacceptable number. But the IIJA has provided state DOTs with a foundation to continue making progress to drive that number towards zero. When it comes to IIJA's challenges, first is the administration of the discretionary grant programs. The process around discretionary grants has shown to be slow, burdensome, and less efficient in turning federal funds into projects and benefits compared to the deployment of formula funds provided to state DOTs. Another challenge has been the impact of inflation. A 70% increase in highway construction costs in the last 4 years means that states have actually lost ground on purchasing power, even with IIJA's nominal funding increases, which was only about 20 to 25% for state DOT formula programs. Yet another challenge is the bureaucratic red tape related to federal regulations and permitting requirements. While the IIJA included some provisions to address this issue, some of those provisions have not been implemented, and still more can be done in the next piece of legislation. The final challenge I'll mention today is related to Buy America requirements. AASHTO and the state DOTs remain unwavering in our support of increasing America's manufacturing capacity, creating domestic jobs, and supporting economic growth. However, there is still significant concern about the industry's transition to IIJA's new Buy America requirements. Specifically, we request reversing an FHWA final rule that was issued earlier this month that ended the long-standing waiver for manufactured products. This Congress has an extraordinary opportunity to develop and enact the next Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. In the next bill, AASHTO asks Congress to build on the proven successes of the state DOT formula programs. We also request maximum flexibility and transferability between funding categories, coupled with the removal of regulatory and programmatic burdens that often delay project delivery. The next bill should look at IIJA's funding levels as the starting point, and those levels should grow from that starting point. Finally, I would like to thank Congress for the work for working with state DOTs on a fix to FHWA's August redistribution process and on the unprecedented natural disasters that state DOTs have faced in the last few months. More work is needed in both areas, but we appreciate what has been done so far, so thank you. To close, AASHTO and its members are fully committed to assisting this subcommittee in putting together the next surface transportation bill to ensure our nation's long-term economic growth and improve safety through the federally assisted, state-implemented federal highway program. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dellinger.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for allowing me to testify on behalf of the American Trucking Associations. Beyond my role as ATA Chairman, I serve as President and CEO of Cargo Transporters, a family-based trucking company based in Western North Carolina. It is a privilege to be here today as you prepare to reauthorize the federal highway bill. This is an issue that affects all Americans, and especially the 8.5 million men and women who work in our industry. The supply chain crisis of 2021 exposed serious consequences of underinvestment in transportation. And more recently, Hurricane Helene's devastation to my home state highlighted the need for robust transportation networks. ATA strongly supported passage of the last highway bill, which made substantial investments in all 50 states. The legislation provided the largest infusion of funding in our nation's supply chain in nearly a century. Yet, the harsh reality that after accounting for inflation, we're spending less on roads and bridges today. Failure to act comes at a risk and imposes its own costs. Case in point, highway bottlenecks add over $100 billion to the cost of freight transportation annually. And that's the equivalent of 435,000 drivers sitting idle for 1 year. It's imperative that we expand the capacity and eliminate the inefficiencies to boost U.S. manufacturing, grow public and private businesses, and lower costs for the consumer. Infrastructure improvements reduce hazards. Promoting safety for the motoring public and our drivers is a high priority for the trucking industry. And that's reflected in the fact that motor carriers invest over $14 billion annually in safety-related systems and training. But this is bigger than us. We need Congress to help build on that progress. From increasing truck parking that would alleviate dangerous situations where truckers are forced to park in unauthorized locations, to ensuring that effective and robust drug testing protocols remain intact to keep drivers who are under the influence off our roads. In addition to enhancing safety, the trucking industry has made significant strides in improving our environmental footprint while continuing the task of moving the vast economy. Over the past 40 years, advancements in engine technology have produced trucks that are 99% cleaner. Unfortunately, over the past several years, the EPA abandoned a collaborative model that made these achievements possible. The EPA and a patchwork of states have imposed mandates that threaten to raise costs and cause significant disruption without delivering the intended environmental benefits. We look forward to working with the new administration and this 119th Congress to reverse the trends set forth and restore a common sense approach that sets ambitious and achievable standards. My trucking career began nearly 4 decades ago. I've seen firsthand the incredible opportunities this industry provides individuals to support their families and attain the American dream. And it is with my hope that Congress will continue to partner with us to incentivize workforce development and protect pathways to entrepreneurship to include the independent contractor model, making it easier for more people to find rewarding and good-paying jobs in trucking. We look forward to working with every one of you in this subcommittee as you develop an infrastructure package that promotes safety for the motoring public and our drivers, while prompting the creation of efficiencies as we move our nation's economy. Roads and bridges aren't affiliated to a given party. They are an American priority. Thank you for allowing me to speak today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Norton, Chairman Graves, and Ranking Member Larson, and members of this committee, thank you for inviting me here to testify. My name is Janet Kavanaugh, and I'm here on behalf of more than 11,000 employees of Vulcan Materials Company, the nation's largest producer of construction aggregates and a major producer of aggregates-based asphalt and ready-mix concrete. The 500 member companies of the National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association comprise 100,000 direct jobs at over 9,000 locations and generate approximately $35 billion a year annually in economic output. Article 1 of the Constitution clearly enumerates Congress's role to build roads and transportation networks on which our nation's growth and security depend. We are proud to supply the essential construction materials for this backbone of the American economy and the safe, efficient movement of goods and people. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, enacted in November 2021, marked a once-in-a-generation investment in surface transportation infrastructure. With the highway and transit authorizations in this law expiring on September 30th, 2026, I would offer 3 underlying principles for the committee to consider as it begins the reauthorization process. First, enact a long-term bill with certain, predictable, multi-year funding. A long-term federal aid highway program authorization with reliable, predictable, multi-year funding is the foundation upon which state and local governments and their partners across the construction industry plan, design, engineer, construct, operate, and maintain infrastructure year over year. State DOTs are the managers of their transportation infrastructure inventory, which is a multi-year challenge. Stable policy and predictable funding are the right approaches to address this challenge. Second, emphasize core highway programs and state decision-making. We support this committee maximizing funding through the core formula apportionments and maintaining the federal aid highway program as a state-administered, federally assisted program. For the past 100 years, formula funding to states has been the indisputable foundation of the program. Formula funds are efficient and flexible, enabling state and local decision-makers to address their citizens' needs. In contrast, the IIJA's allocated and specialty apportioned programs with detailed eligibilities often defined by federal agencies limit state and local decision-making flexibility. In addition, slow implementation of new programs has resulted in lagging obligation rates. Third, pay for investment through a highway trust fund supported by all users. Beginning in 1956, the Highway Trust Fund supported programs through user fees. However, since 2002, user fee revenues have been insufficient. We have been fortunate that Congress maintained long-term, predictable, and increasing funding levels by supplementing user fees with general funds and other transfers, but we are facing the same challenge again in the upcoming reauthorization. In June, the Congressional Budget Office projected that the Highway Trust Fund would end fiscal year 2028 with a gap of about $18 billion based on flat spending levels. The cumulative shortfall through fiscal year 2031 is estimated at $136 billion. These projections underscore the need for a long-term revenue solution supported by all users. The alternative, annual appropriations, would create uncertainty instead of stable, predictable, multi-year contract authority. Finally, as this committee plans for an on-time reauthorization, we urge a return to a more typical, focused surface transportation reauthorization versus what I'll call the IIJA model. Now, to be clear, Vulcan supplies a full range of public infrastructure projects and benefited from more than just the surface transportation portion of IIJA. However, we feel that a focused effort, managed through regular order, will provide for the important debate, discussion, and negotiation, benefit the final product, and help deliver an on-time reauthorization. Delays and extensions are not in the public interest. They drive up cost, hold up capital investments in hiring, and diminish the value of benefits by pushing them out to the future. We recognize that to accomplish this over the next 20 months, before September 30th, 2026 is a daunting task, and we stand ready to collaborate and partner with you. Thank you again for inviting me to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Colvin, you're recognized for up to 5 minutes.
On behalf of the Transportation Trades Department, AFL-CIO, and our 37 unions, I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify on the topic of our national highway system and our national infrastructure. TTD represents millions of workers across the entire transportation sector, and there is no part of our highways that they do not work on. From the workers manufacturing American steel to those using it to build bridges, from those preparing the ground and laying foundation for our highways to the skilled professionals inspecting and maintaining them, these workers are not only delivering on the promise of the 2021 infrastructure law's generational investment, they're doing that while they're training the next generation of workers to meet the increased demand for skilled labor. For decades, TTD has advocated for the kind of generational investments that would finally bring our infrastructure into the 21st century. For us, it was not about spending money for its own sake. It was not about creating union jobs just for the sake of creating union jobs, though we're happy to have them. It's about hearing the voices of workers who are on the front lines of our transportation systems, who can see the unsafe practices, the crumbling roads, crumbling bridges, outdated systems that we use, insufficient capacity, and the inefficiencies that turn routine operations into nightmares for workers and for commuters alike. The economic impact of these investments have already been significant, and they cannot be overstated. In October of 2024, US DOT announced over 1.7 million construction and manufacturing jobs have been created in the prior 4 years, and 700,000 additional in the transportation sector, including pilots, port workers, bus drivers, rail engineers, and other professions. I want to say that the Biden administration was really critical in the unprecedented executive actions that they took to ensure that these investments did create and maintain good union jobs. Through executive orders and regulatory actions that strengthened Buy America requirements, expanded worker safety protections, and prioritized high-road labor standards in federal contracting. Under the previous leadership of Secretary Buttigieg, the Department of Transportation specifically worked to tie federal investments in infrastructure into ensuring that we had real growth in jobs through project labor agreements, local hire provisions, and that would not have happened with just the IIJA alone. These combined legislative and executive actions created a comprehensive framework that didn't just fund infrastructure, it ensured these investments built career pathways into the middle class. Beyond creating direct employment opportunities, federal infrastructure investments generate a significant multiplier effect. They ensure businesses have access to workers, customers can reach commercial centers, and goods can move efficiently throughout our supply chains. This is a strategic investment that delivers demonstrable returns for our communities across America. It would be a mistake right now to roll back any of those protections, and we would argue that they should all be enshrined in an upcoming reauthorization. And while I do understand that today's hearing is focused on highways, I hope you can all understand that I probably can't just stick to that one mode here. But I will say, freight doesn't just move on highways. It comes in through ports, gets loaded onto trains and trucks. So we do have to look at this as an entire ecosystem. Sorry, my computer's just being weird. On a national scale, the numbers tell a powerful story. Nationwide transit, just get back to here. Okay. On a national scale, the numbers tell a powerful story. Nationwide transit ridership has been steadily climbing with over 7.9 billion total trips projected for 2024, an increase driven by communities recognizing the economic and environmental benefit of robust investment in public transportation. The growth in public transportation has been sort of a recent surprise and one that we're happy to see. For years, we had been warning against workforce challenges in this sector, but in 2023 alone, the transit workforce expanded by 10,000 new jobs, with salaries increasing by over $1 billion. These gains reflect not only recovery of our transit systems, but also renewed confidence in the importance of transit to our nation's infrastructure. I do want to say the DOT just recently released results from efforts they had taken to help reduce the real challenge of assaults on our national transit systems. One of the findings that they released is that there's been a 232% increase in assaults on transit workers over the last 10 years. And that is unacceptable. We took real measures in the IIJA to deal with assaults on transit workers, but there's still an outstanding rulemaking from the FAST Act that was years ago that still has not been implemented. We have to take additional actions to put a stop to this. I also cannot overstate the importance of Buy America policies for our workers and our economy. Buy America ensures that when we spend federal dollars on infrastructure, we're also investing in American jobs, American manufacturing, and the U.S. industrial base. These policies create high-quality, union-supported jobs that pay fair wages and offer safe working conditions. They reduce our reliance on foreign supply chains, strengthen our economy, and ensure that taxpayer-funded projects deliver real benefits to American families. As Congress looks towards the next surface reauthorization, it is essential to provide federal agencies with the resources and oversight needed to enforce Buy America effectively. And I will end myself there. Thank you.
Can you wrap up quickly?
I will just end with this. I know many of you in this room weren't here for the IIJA. I know many of you probably didn't support the IIJA, if my math is correct. But I will say that the efforts that President Trump is taking to undermine those funds, I hope we can all agree that whether you support it or not, that's not undermining grant making, undermining federal funding is not a serious way of dealing with implementing your policy priorities. And I would urge all of you to, even if quietly, to urge this administration to reverse those decisions.
The gentleman's time has expired. Appreciate everybody's testimony today, very much so. Mr. Timon, I'm going to start with you. The IJA created many new discretionary grant programs administered by the Department of Transportation. Can you share quickly with the committee your perspective on how formula funding compares to discretionary grant funding in executing projects?
Well, thank you for that question, Chairman Rouser. According to the Congressional Budget Office, an estimated 67% of formula dollars that are provided to state DOTs through IIJA have been spent out in the first 2 years of when they're allocated. Conversely, the spend out rate for discretionary grants under that same time frame is between 1% and 7.4%. So, I think that those statistics demonstrate the efficiencies that exist with the formula dollars and some of the inefficiencies that exist with the discretionary grant programs.
And can you share your thoughts on how channeling funding through the existing core highway formula programs helps with certainty in capitalizing on the expertise of our state departments of transportation?
Absolutely. So state DOTs rely on the federal formula dollars for the predictability that come with a long-term federal surface transportation bill. So when Congress enacts a 5-year bill, as they did with IIJA, it provides state DOTs with a roadmap and predictability for how much federal funding they are going to receive through those formula dollars each of those 5 years. State DOTs are then able to work with their metropolitan planning organizations and localities in their state to identify a pipeline of projects that is ready to go in each of those years, and they're able to execute that plan in a way that gets those dollars out the door into the community, often in the first year or two of when that money is authorized and appropriated.
Ms. Kavanaugh, we obviously need to look for ways to streamline and limit, federal dollars so that what we're appropriating and the funding that we have available goes a whole lot further. What are your thoughts on how we can address permitting efficiencies at the federal level, and how do we better streamline the review processes to ensure projects aren't getting needlessly hung up and subsequently increasing the cost pretty dramatically? I think for every year of delay in a project, it adds about 20–30% to the cost of the project.
Mr. Chairman, that is a great question, and it's one that's been asked in every reauthorization since ICE-T in 1991, which was the year that I graduated from high school. So this is a perennial question. Now, fortunately, IIJA did codify one federal decision. I think there are going to be opportunities going through this next reauthorization process to look at how that was implemented, and also to look again at federal permitting timelines to see where there might be opportunities again to increase it. But really, you have an opportunity, I think, going forward to ensure projects have the support that they need, the unified stakeholder support, use the planning process to ensure that what you're moving forward is something that is not going to get caught up in lawsuits in future times. And then it's DOTs and Federal Highway Administration working together to expedite moving those projects along?
Absolutely. Mr. Dallinger, I'll move quickly to you, given the time is winding down a bit. Can you share with the subcommittee what you see as the top challenges facing the trucking industry as we prepare to reauthorize these programs?
I think the top one that comes to mind maybe is the repeal of the FET, a longstanding tax on our industry, probably one of the highest taxes as well, that would allow us to spend dollars on other safety features or investments in our company. Probably the biggest thing, and for a lot of you that may not be aware, but FET adds $17,000 to each of our tractor purchases a year. And I know everyone likes a buy one, get one free type thing, but for every 10 trucks that we purchase, we could purchase the 11th truck with the repeal of the FET. And on our trailers, we look at $5,800 on those. And if we purchase 200 trailers a year, and that's normally what our cycle is to replace equipment, we're looking at that times 200. So FET is definitely a big one.
I see my time has just expired, so I will recognize Ms. Norton for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Timon, since 2012, Congress has directed states to incorporate performance measures to help ensure federal funding is addressing national goals. Congress listed safety as the first goal in the statute, followed by infrastructure conditions. States had developed asset management plans that are directly woven into investment decisions, and since 2012 have helped improve pavement and bridge conditions on the national highway system. By contrast, safety on our roads has gotten worse. In 2012, there were 33,561 people killed in traffic crashes. In 2023, 40,990 people died. Do you support requirements to hold states accountable for investment decisions based on safety results in the same way states are held accountable for infrastructure conditions?
Well, thank you for that question, Ranking Member Norton. First, let me say that safety continues to be the number one priority for every state DOT in the country. And the number of deaths that we're seeing on our nation's roadways, though it has come down over the last 10 consecutive quarters, is still unacceptable. What I would say is that the performance measure sections that are currently in law do require states to set up strategic highway safety plans, which guide the decision-making for how they allocate resources. But when it comes to essentially forcing a state's hand to make investment decisions, I would say that the same way that folks within the District of Columbia don't want the federal government taking a heavy hand in how they make their investment decisions, I think that every state in the country prefers giving states the flexibility to address those challenges on their own. They still are provided federal funds through the Highway Safety Improvement Program to invest in safety projects, and states go over and above the dollars that they're provided to make sure that they're making improvements from a safety perspective. But I don't know if we would support a more heavier hand from the federal government in directing states in how to make those investment decisions, because each state approaches those investment decisions in their unique way.
Thank you. Mr. Dellinger, last Congress, I introduced the Bipartisan Household Goods Shipping Consumer Protection Act with Congressman Ezell to address freight fraud and restore federal authority to prevent scams from occurring in the shipping industry. We plan on reintroducing this bill, and there will be a bipartisan Senate companion bill as well. What are the benefits of enacting this bill for both shippers and consumers?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ranking Member Norton, for introduction of that bill, and we do support it because definitely anything that protects the consumer, but also protects the good carriers out there that are doing the right thing is very welcomed.
Thank you. Mr. Timon, Congress recently enacted a disaster recovery bill that provides $8 billion to the Federal Highway Administration Relief Program. Congress did not provide the $50 million requested by the Federal Transit Administration to meet its emergency relief program needs for disaster-related repairs. Does the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials support providing dedicated funding to the Federal Transit Administration's emergency relief program like they do to the highway program?
We believe that the federal government does have a role in providing relief for emergency situations, as they did with the $8 billion bill that was just adopted, and do agree that funding should be allocated to the Federal Transit Administration's emergency relief program. I would say that both of those programs probably are historically underfunded when you look at the highway program and the transit program over the years that they've been authorized.
Well, I see my time has expired.
Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. I want to start with Mr. Dellinger, and I want to commend you for the forward-looking proposals you've had on Highway Trust Fund and infrastructure investment in addition to road safety and driver shortage. And I'm going to focus on that driver shortage issue just real quick. I've been a proponent of legislation to allow younger drivers access to commercial trucking with the hope of replenishing our driver workforce. I wonder if you can talk about what ATA is doing to support and increase the driver workforce and what we here in this committee ought to be looking at as we take on surface reauthorization to do the same thing.
Well, first of all, Representative Crawford, thank you for supporting ATA and our industry with STAD, but we would also like to see that become permanent. I think we're a little bit late at the game as far as getting the kinks worked out, and the thing sunsets, I guess, in November of this year. It's something that we would like to see permanent, but getting younger drivers in is important, but also getting women into our industry. We offer a lot of good careers, a lot of good driving careers that women do well, and getting them involved. And we could do that through basically better parking, a lot more parking. I think we need funding for parking that's not in a bucket with other groups pulling out of it.
Right.
We need safe parking for females where they feel safe being out there.
Sure, that makes sense. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about federal funding, and you may have made some comments about this already, so if I'm repeating myself, I apologize, but I'm a proponent of formula funding, and I'll admit I'm a little skeptical about the wisdom of some of the IJA-created discretionary grants. I think that less than 16% of IJA's raised grant money has been obligated, only roughly 1% has been spent. We only have about 18 more months of IJA left, so that's also a concern, and I hear all the time how financing lags cause to skyrocket as inflation sort of devalues that dollar. So I wondered if you could talk about whether formula or discretionary grants are better for DOTs or for our national infrastructure needs. I just want to make sure we're putting taxpayer money in the best place to get the most return on the investment.
Well, thank you for that question, Congressman Crawford. As I mentioned earlier, we do firmly believe that the best use and most efficient use of the federal dollars is through the Federal Aid Highway Program formula dollars. 66% of those formula dollars provided to states have been spent out in the first 2 years in which they've been appropriated or authorized, whereas on the discretionary side, it's between 1% and 8%. You mentioned the raise grants. An example in the state of Georgia, a local applicant had received one of those grants 2 years after they were selected. They have yet to even, it took them 2 years to execute a grant agreement with FHWA before they were, or USDOT before they were even able to access the dollars. So I think we're seeing that across the discretionary programs, just the inefficiency associated with putting out a NOFO, selecting the projects, and then awarding those projects. The money just isn't spending out and creating jobs in communities at the rate I think Congress had hoped it would. It does create those jobs and have the impact of the formula dollars because the money goes out almost always in the same year or two that it's authorized.
Okay, thank you. I want to come back to you, Mr. Dellinger, just for a quick minute on the issue of road safety. Hair testing for drug abuse is an issue I've heard from constituents about quite a bit over the years, and the Federal Highway Administration has been dragging its feet on regulations allowing certified hair testing results to be included in the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. And I hear anecdotally all the time about how many drivers have positive hair tests but negative urine tests. That's very concerning to me. Does ATA have any data you can share on the scope of this problem and how hair testing could be a positive safety solution?
Well, I'm going to speak for our own company. In 2015, the FAST Act, HHS was asked to find a workable solution for hair testing. And so in 2017, we began hair testing in our company. The unfortunate thing is it's never been recognized, and a urine test costs between $38 and $45, and hair tests is between $88 and $98. So we're running parallel programs and have been since 2017. You know, I don't know how many people would not come to our door knowing that we have hair testing, but let me tell you, knowing that we have it, we have probably, I'd say 1 in 10 to 1 in 15 that end up being
So it
positive.
improves the quality of applicant for you then?
Pardon?
It improves the quality of applicant for you?
Well, we like to think so, yes.
Good. I'm out of time.
But the unfortunate thing is that driver, all he has to do is leave us when he fails the hair test and go down the street and take a urine test. And
Sure.
is working for someone.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Colvin, you talked about workers, the importance of the workers as part of the IIJA. As we look at the next version of this bill, can you talk about the value of the work that we did to tie workforce development and basically building, as we're building next generation infrastructure, we're building the next generation workforce for that infrastructure, and talk a little bit about the value of that. Is that good or bad?
I think obviously really excellent, and I don't mean to undercut the real serious advancements that there were in workforce training programs in the IIJA when I mentioned the additional steps that this administration took. But I think if you look beyond just the apprenticeship programs, you know, there's a whole wealth of other employment created by these investments that they don't have those sort of traditional apprenticeship-style programs that a lot of the building trades do. So, you know, I mentioned transit. That was an industry that had an above-average age of workers. They were all within, you know, the majority were in within retirement age. You know, I think 5 years. And transit agencies were really struggling to bring in the next generation of workers, and paired with that were policies, you know, looking at transitioning to electric buses, but we had no real pipeline for training those workers. So, you know, I think we're now starting to finally see the benefits of that. I think the fact that the hiring is up is obviously a good sign, and while there have been challenges with how exactly to deal with training for transition to electric vehicles, I think you know, more of those sort of supportive programs that pair training with procurement would be something that you should be focused on.
Thanks. Mr. Chapman, I know there's a focus on the formula funding, but truthfully, there'd be projects that wouldn't be funded in all of our districts if we relied only on the states to take the formula money and make it happen. I can point to projects in my district. Maybe it's just the nature of my district, or it's because their representation in Congress. But the truth is, they wouldn't be funded. And so I agree that it's been slow on the discretionary, but the culvert program, which we call the culvert program in our state, the Supreme Court of the United States said we had to fix this. So there's a national interest that we have a culvert program, as a for instance. And so I think there are examples like that, rather than just relying only on the states to take the formula money. And then and then dangle it out in front of local governments. And we heard from Mayor Pro Tem Fuentes of this last week. So I want to know if you're willing to commit with this committee to actually figure out a way to improve the selection process and help communities gain access to funds. I know it's not in Nashville's interest. I heard it from Roger Millar all the time. This is the Democratic and Republican state DOT message. It's not a Republican message, it's not a Democratic message, it's everybody. But I don't agree with it. And so I want to know if you'll commit to working with us to solve the problems that we do have, as opposed to just relying on give the states more money. If I saw all that money in discretionary, I'd want it too, if I was a state. That's not the way we wrote it.
Absolutely, Ranking Member Larson. We would love to work with the committee to find ways to improve the project selection process. I would also say that, I think that there should be a robust discussion on what types of projects should be funded with federal dollars versus what shouldn't. Because I think one of the reasons that these dollars are spending out so slowly is that there are some of these smaller projects or local projects that just aren't a good fit for all of the bureaucratic red tape that goes along with a federal dollar that comes through these discretionary programs. So I think that we would absolutely welcome that discussion to figure out what are the right types of projects to be funded with federal dollars and how to improve the project selection process.
Well, apparently we've got 20 months to do that. So, and going to Ms. Kavanaugh, on I think in your testimony, you looked at, if I've got this right, the construction cost index chart was in your testimony. Perhaps it wasn't. Okay, it doesn't make that's not as relevant. It's in somebody's, big factor. The material costs are high. There's inflation in that. There's a little tick down in the last quarter or so. How can we keep that moving? How can we keep the inflation on material costs continuing to move down?
Sure. So was not in my testimony, but we are well aware of construction cost inflation. Vulcan has seen higher than expected.
So what can we do to keep that little movement downward movement going?
Well, I mean, inflation is a function of a lot of different factors. The international environment, we saw when Russia invaded Ukraine, it substantially increased. Our oil prices, our fuel prices. I think the more stability you have overall in the system, the global system, the economic system, that's of critical importance. We continue to just manage inflation as best we can in the categories where it's sticky.
Okay.
We know we can't
I'm
control
over my
that.
time, and I want to respect the chair. So if I could get, for the record, some comments from your industry on that question, that'd be real good.
Love to provide those for you. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yield back.
Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Timon, you mentioned in your written testimony that you want to ease the assessment or access to the assignment of NEPA or for states that want to do that. But how would you, or could you just elaborate on why or how or what takes place that makes you well-positioned as a state of Georgia, to take that assignment?
Well, the NEPA assignment pilot program that's provided for on the federal level allows states to be able to essentially make those decisions to manage that process in lieu of the federal government. And there are a handful of states that have taken that opportunity, including Texas, Utah, California, that have really seen an improvement in the number of months it takes to get through the NEPA process, because now they control that as opposed to relying more on the federal government. So we've seen that it is a very effective use of the tools that are provided at the federal level. Unfortunately, not every state is going to be able to take advantage of that, because one of the aspects of that program will require states to waive sovereign immunity. And there are a lot of states that are not interested in waiving sovereign immunity in order to take on those responsibilities under NEPA assignment. So that's been a big barrier for why other states are not taking on NEPA assignment is because state legislators and some governors are reticent to waive sovereign immunity.
Are you in Georgia ready to do that?
Unfortunately, our AASHTO's vice president and commissioner of the Georgia DOT was unable to be here today because of the snowstorm that they're dealing with. They have, I think, even 3 inches of snow in Savannah. But Georgia is one of those states that has not taken on NEPA assignment, but they have had incorporated other streamlining tools into what they do. They set up an office where they are able to bring in personnel from federal resource offices to be able to sit together, to be able to work on specific projects that have to go through the permitting and regulatory process. But they have found that putting those federal agencies together that are working on Georgia-specific projects in the room together has really improved the efficiency of being able to get some of those projects moved through the pipeline in a more efficient manner.
So that's, it's like an interagency thing of some sort?
It is. Georgia is one of the states that actually pays for personnel in other federal resource agencies to work specifically on projects. So it is a little strange in that the state is actually using their dollars to pay for salaries for federal employees, but they feel it's a worthwhile investment because it helps them expedite those projects that are specific to Georgia. In an ideal world, they wouldn't have to do that, that the process would work faster and the people would be there to actually work on those projects. But in Georgia's case, they actually pay for the salaries and expenses associated with some of those federal resource agency staff to be able to expedite projects.
So do you think that that model should be replicated in other places?
I think that given the current structure, it has worked well in Georgia and several other states, and I think other states are continuing to look at that as an option. So it is a model to help improve the process, especially for states that are unwilling to waive sovereign immunity or unable to waive sovereign immunity and take on NEPA assignment.
Okay, yield back.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser and Ranking Member Holmes Norton for hosting this necessary hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for your time and your testimony. The title of this hearing, Transportation to Move People, is fitting because every day we rely on transportation to live our lives. In fact, all of us took some form of transportation just to be here today. Whether we walked on the roads, drove a car, or rode a train, we need to build a future where safe, efficient, and sustainable transportation is not a luxury, but a reality for every American, regardless of zip code. When we invest in our infrastructure, we create a ripple effect that touches every aspect of our society and economy. The investments from President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law have already contributed to the creation of 1.6 million jobs in construction and manufacturing. Our job now is to continue building on that progress so millions are not left behind. I look forward to hearing your answer to this question, Mr. Timon. On Monday, President Trump issued an executive order titled Unleashing American Energy. Section 7 of that order states, quote, all agencies shall immediately pause the disbursement of funds appropriated through the Inflation Reduction Act or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which will impact transportation funding under those two acts. Can you explain the impact the pause in federal funding will have, and how is AASHTO working with the new administration to clarify this order?
Well, thank you for that question. I will say that when we saw that executive order on Monday and then how it was implemented briefly yesterday, there was a lot of concern within the state DOT community because for a short period of time, federal funding reimbursements for the formula programs was halted. And we worked closely with the new administration and the folks at USD and USDOT and at OMB to make sure there was clarification that the intent of that executive order was not to stop the flow of all federal dollars that were provided for transportation programs through those two bills. And our understanding is that both USDOT and OMB do not intend for that executive order to impact all of the transportation programs in those two acts, and that they are working together to clarify exactly which programs it should apply to. So there was some panic yesterday initially. We do feel a little bit better about it as of yesterday afternoon and this morning, but there's still some concern.
Yeah, it's kind of like, first you're numb, and then you start realizing, okay, well, maybe there's some wiggle room, but then when you go back and read the executive order, there is none. Yeah. So there's a need for clarification amidst the chaos that has ensued from this reckless action in issuing this executive order. Mr. Dellinger, with the recent record-breaking increase in cargo theft across the country, this issue has become a pressing challenge for the trucking industry. American Trucking Association member companies have been heavily impacted, facing increased costs, disrupted supply chains, and heightened security risks. Could you please elaborate on the impact this issue is having on the industry, and how can stakeholders and the federal government collaborate to enhance prevention efforts and strengthen enforcement against cargo theft?
Cargo theft has become rampant, and I think that basically the thieves and the rings have learned a lot of different ways to steal, whether it's stealing loads, whether it's actually going in there and posing as a broker and sending a truck in knowing that they're not going to take the freight to where it's destined. They're going to take it to a warehouse somewhere. But probably the biggest
And these are not
solution would be
illegal.
that the federal government work, that there be some type of clearinghouse where you could call one location. I mean, we're now involved in situations where you got to go in the jurisdiction that it's in to report the crime. And
These
so
aren't illegal immigrants that are doing that, are they?
I'm not going to put that on illegal immigrants. I mean,
Well, did
I've
you
understood
see
it's maybe even Russian gangs or.
Did you see an executive order issued yesterday that related to this problem that the American Trucking Association and the industry is experiencing with these cargo thefts?
I did not.
Thank you.
The gentleman's time's expired. Mr. Bost, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Timon, as you know, I am leading a bipartisan effort in the House to authorize federal funding to expand truck parking capacities. Many states have indicated they don't have enough truck parking capacity, which we know affects highway safety, supply chain efficiency, driver recruitment, and retention. As a representative of the State Department of Transportation, if Congress created a grant program exclusively to be used in the truck parking projects, would your members pursue these federal funds for the protection of the states?
If there was a grant program for truck parking, states would be interested in that. I would say that it's not just availability of funding on the state DOT side. A lot of the right-of-way that the state DOTs have control of, there is a restriction as to what they can do within that right-of-way, including establishing new rest areas and commercializing them to be able to support truck parking. So that is another
So we
barrier.
need to also work on the regulations that allow you to be freed up to use the properties around there to expand that.
That is another challenge.
That's good
that
to
we
know,
face.
and if you would reach out to our staff, I'd like to see what we can do there. Mr. Dellinger, thank you, first off, for your support of the truck parking legislation. I think it's vitally important, and you mentioned it in your testimony that it is, and I was in the business for several years. But I'm going to switch gears here, and I'm going to want to ask you about something. As a former trucker myself, one of the biggest concerns with the Highway Trust Fund has been its long-term health and potential changes that have been put on the truckers. In your testimony, you brought up something that it actually bothers me, and here's why. And that was on tolls, specifically on trucks. So right now, and for years, we have had, if you travel in the intra or interstate trucking industry, you have apportioned plates. And those apportioned plates, you basically, if you own the business, you calculate out how many miles last year you drove in each state, and then you pay apportionately based on each state. Well, back whenever I was doing dispatching and driving myself, we couldn't figure out which one cost the most. But computers today say, okay, I can drive down one interstate in Missouri and not have to go into Illinois because Illinois is too expensive. Do you think these tolls added on top of that will then also add to the fact that many of the trucking people that are in the trucking industries, they're gonna make wise decisions. They're gonna say, hey, you know what? We're no longer driving down and through that state. We're gonna go around that state because we can to save money.
I think that does happen.
Okay.
You know, I guess as far as our position on tolls, we just want tolls to be equitable. You know, we want the passenger cars to pay just like the trucks. We're not opposed to paying, but basically, you know, we are against tolling current roads, maybe new roads or bridges, but current roads, and we need alternatives where there are tolls.
And
Our company, you know, our company, 500 trucks, we spend close to approximately $180,000 a month in tolls.
okay. Well, first off, you said your trucking company has 500 trucks. The most I ever had was 45. God bless you. But when you say the tolls, because if you put tolls on existing road, we've already paid for those, right? And the maintenance and upkeep is still should be, the idea and intent of the motor fuel tax was that we would have enough. But we've been dealing since I've been here with the issue of what taxation, what generation of revenue, especially as we start going to more EVs and everything like that, how are we going to get those revenues in? And do you have any suggestions for that?
Well, I guess if I had the answer, I wouldn't be running a trucking company, but.
That's true, too.
I mean, you know, we want to help to be a part of the solution and not the problem. We want to pay our fair share. And, you know, we think as well, EVs need to be paying to the Highway Trust Fund as well. And I guess, I know it's kind of a difficult thing to raise taxes, but, you know, when you look at the tax base, the fuel tax base, basically it hasn't been raised in, 30 years?
Right.
And you look at, I think back when I started driving in the 60s and 70s, the cars got about 8 or 10 miles a gallon. Now they get, you know, between 30 and 40.
And trucks got 2?
Yeah,
Gallon.
I can remember when I first got into business, 3 miles a gallon. Now we're getting 8.2.
Yep.
So less dollars there as well. So I think there's time that a solution is found. I don't have the solution, but I think working together, we can come up with.
I think we do have to find it. My time's expired, and thank you for being here today.
Mr. Pappas, you're recognized.
Well, thank you to the chair and ranking member for holding this session as we begin to prepare for reauthorization of surface transportation and think about how IIJA has been working and some of the priorities that we have that we're seeing from our district level. I really appreciate the testimony of this panel. Mr. Dellinger, if I could start with you and just sort of building off that conversation, you kind of beat me to the punch in bringing up the FET issue, which is something that I think we've got to take a look at if we want to achieve fairness and sustainability with respect to how we fund surface transportation. You mentioned the FET issue. This was a tax initially introduced during the World War I era to support wartime mobilization more than 100 years ago. The federal levy is 12%, which is the highest excise tax on any product in the country. Tax is only collected when trucks are newly purchased, so there's a disincentive for the procurement of newer, more efficient models. And as you say in your testimony, a single truck manufactured in 1988 emits the same pollution as 60 trucks built today. So that's pretty amazing to consider. Along with Mr. LaMalfa, we've introduced the Modern Clean Safe Trucks Act, which will repeal the World War I era federal excise tax. Wonder if you could just speak a little bit more and underscore for the committee the importance of looking at this 12% FET, which I think sets us back with respect to us procuring newer, safer trucks, easing supply chain challenges, and working to support businesses like yours. And by the way, congratulations on 60 years in business.
Thank you. From the FET, I mean, you could look at it in a lot of different ways. And I spoke earlier about, for every 10 trucks we purchase, we could purchase 11 and create jobs. But other ways are when you're looking at that environmental footprint as well. If we were able to take trucks, incentivize people to buy newer trucks that have better safety systems on and eliminate some of the 2007, 2010 and earlier trucks, and actually have then a truck that is more energy efficient and produces less emissions, would be better for the economy, would be better for the environment. That's, I guess, also from a safety standpoint as well, having newest and the greatest out there.
Appreciate those comments. Mr. Timon, thank you for reflecting the state perspective here. As you know, the total amount of Highway Trust Fund dollars that can be annually committed is capped by Congress every year during the appropriations process. State DOTs receive their portion of the obligation limitation. They must use it before the end of the fiscal year or the funding will permanently lapse. Every August, to avoid losing those funds, state DOTs are given access to any anticipated unused obligation limitation beyond their initial share. So this is a kind of a wait and hurry up approach. This is always a pain point that I hear about from my state DOT, places unnecessary pressure on them, and puts the needs of our constituents and the priorities at risk. So in your experience, can you talk a little bit more about the August redistribution process, how it worked this past year, what recommendations you would have for us going forward?
Well, thank you for that question. And you're absolutely right. The FHWA's August redistribution process is broken. It was originally intended to distribute, just a handful of dollars that were left as they approached the end of the fiscal year, and provide it to state DOTs because FHWA knew that state DOTs would be able to put those dollars to use as quickly as possible within that fiscal year. This past year, August redistribution was $8.7 billion, or 14.5% of the total federal highway program. So states were asked to obligate $8.7 billion, close to 15% of the total federal highway program, in just 30 days, in the last month of the fiscal year. Now, states were able to do that because they have they had a pipeline of projects that were ready to go, but we have pretty much exhausted that pipeline from state to state, and if it's not addressed legislatively, they will run into problems in obligating that, and some of that money will lapse in future years. Congress did enact, through the WRDA bill, a partial fix to that will take essentially roughly $2 billion off the table. So hopefully you see a reduction in next year's August redistribution. But there is also a fix that's pending in the Senate-passed THUD appropriations bill that would really help address this as well and help even drive that number further down. And we hope that the House can support the Senate position in that bill.
Well, thanks for your comments. We want to continue to hear from AASHTO on that issue, and I yield back my time.
Mr. Babin, you're recognized.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for being here as well. We really appreciate your expertise. My first question is for Mr. Dellinger. Mr. Dellinger, how does the patchwork of state-specific emissions regulations and sales mandates, such as those in California, impact trucking companies in terms of operational efficiency, compliance costs, and long-term planning?
Well, the problem is we run in all 48 states, and whenever the group of states take on different rules and regulations, it becomes difficult for us to operate. I mean, we are operating on interstate highways,
Sure,
for the most part, and we do need the help to have a federal rule, not that CARB or a group decides what we're going to do as a nation.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And my next question is for you as well. I understand that cargo theft remains a significant challenge for trucking industry, impacting ATA member companies through increased costs, supply chain disruptions, safety risks. What do you see as the most pressing gaps in addressing this issue, and how can industry stakeholders and policymakers work together to enhance prevention efforts and strengthen enforcement against this cargo theft?
And looking at cargo theft, for us as an organization, we took it on as a top-tier priority. Actually, last January at a meeting that took place, or actually early February. It's one of those things that in our industry, a lot of people did not discuss, did not share. So that's one of the negatives that you just didn't want to talk about, but it has become so prevalent that basically it is an issue that, you know, people are starting to recognize and have discussion. And
Yes, sir.
again, it's having maybe that central clearinghouse that's, you know, looking at all these thefts. I mean, we're not talking about a theft of a piece off a trailer. We're talking about the theft of an entire load.
Right.
You know, this was something that was, again, prevalent years ago in the tobacco industry for the finished product or maybe the electronic issue. But it's got to the point, I mean, they're even still in roll stock paper. I mean, I don't know if they don't know what's on the trailer and just load, you know, just pick it up and go with it. But household goods, I mean, when I say goods, I'm not speaking of household furniture. I'm speaking of toilet paper, paper towels. I mean, those are big
That's
commodities.
desperation.
Yeah.
Maybe that's desperation.
Well, yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And then my next question is for Ms. Kavinicki. Yes, ma'am. I represent the Port of Houston, where Vulcan Materials does quite a bit of business, so we're very familiar with your company. Congress should be in the business of supporting our industry partners and not stepping on their toes. I'm sure you would agree with that. Can you talk a little bit about how Congress can be a good partner, a better partner, if you will, in supporting the aggregates industry?
We have been very fortunate to have a good partner in Congress for the aggregates industry, whether that is access to aggregates, something called the ROCKS Act that, of course, we have many of you who have supported, assistance at the local level in ensuring that there is support for quarries in the places or distribution yards, as in Houston, in the place that we need them. And of course, we have enjoyed the support of many of the members of this committee as Vulcan Materials Company with our issue with Mexico and the illegal shutdown of our operations there. I think the aggregates industry overall knows, though, that the biggest priority here is that long-term, predictable, on-time transportation bill. That's the best way you can support us.
Yes, ma'am. And then finally, do you have any thoughts on how Congress should be streamlining the permitting process? Permits are one of the biggest problems across the broad spectrum of our bureaucracy. And so would you like to chime in and just have a few words about how maybe we could streamline that process?
Sure, and understand, and this allows me to add on, Chairman Rouser, to what I said to you. So our production and delivery is principally affected by state and local laws. But with regard to speeding transportation project delivery, we do, in addition to the full implementation of one federal decision and the analysis of federal permit agency timelines, I think there are a couple specifics to look at. One is expanding categorical exclusions, and the second is granting greater flexibility around utility relocation. That can also help in speeding project development and delivery.
Okay, thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Norton, for holding this hearing today, kicking us off for the 119th Congress for the subcommittee. I appreciate your leadership and looking forward to getting to work, especially as we have a lot of great opportunities this year. Thanks to the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law in 2021, communities from coast to coast will see about $1.2 trillion in local investments to improve the reliability, resilience and efficiency of America's infrastructure over the next 10 years, and Americans are already seeing these tangible differences, including improved roads, bridges, transit systems, airports, waterways, and environmental infrastructure. In Ohio, for example, which is home to the nation's 5th largest interstate system that spans over 8,000 lane miles. We have 19,000 center lane miles. The bipartisan infrastructure law is awarded 27 grants amounting to about $1.3 billion with a B funding to improve our state's roads and bridges, with more than 6.6 committed to our state, which we are very much looking forward to expending and using. And I'd like to turn your attention to Ohio's 13th district, which is where I represent. We've seen over $176 million of investments to create jobs and promote clean, green, safe, more accessible transportation for my constituents and business communities all over. But one of the things that is really important as we are discussing these investments is that they're not just play dollars that we just talk about. And as we are building, literally building our communities, and we're talking about how we're increasing our economic opportunities. I know people in my community get really frustrated when they see detours and barrels, but barrels means jobs. They mean that, I like to say each barrel means a job for someone in this community, that they're investing those resources back into Ohio 13 and across our entire state. And where we are in Ohio, you can get to about 80% of the population in a day's drive, and it just shows how important we are in the transportation network across this country. So knowing that to be the case, and talking about that job specifically, I want to turn my attention to you, Mr. Colvin, because the prevailing wage is an important part of ensuring that the folks who are working on these projects are being paid livable wages and that they can actually sustain themselves and their families. Can you talk a little bit about the members who you represent and why the prevailing wage, the Davis-Bacon standards, are so important to you in our communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think in addition to what you were saying, it guarantees a quality of work that, that they know that there will be high standards for workforce training for those workers, and that the delivered product is going to be better and delivered on time. And, I think beyond Davis-Bacon, looking at other labor workforce protections that are built into our surface transportation programs, it's sort of a promise that the people who are delivering these assets that we're investing in, should be paid fairly and should be able to afford a middle-class lifestyle and not have it be, low wages and undercutting workers as the goal for how we build out our infrastructure.
And thank you for saying that. And even before we get to the point where we have someone on a job site, we have to train them. We have to recruit them into these apprenticeship programs. And I hear from literally every industry I meet with, they have a hard time recruiting and retaining employees. What are some of the things that we could do to help ensure that we have a reliable, well-trained, skilled workforce prepared to take these jobs on as we continue to expend these dollars across the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there was flexibility for funding in the IIJA to go towards workforce recruitment. I think the challenge there is that, if a state DOT is looking at capital expenditures or recruiting with that money, I think, the capital is going to win probably most of the time. So I think, we do have to be more creative about how we recruit, where we recruit from, and I think, that is an outstanding challenge, and it's beyond just construction. State DOTs. Earlier, I mentioned transit agencies had a huge sort of impending cliff of their workforce. So, we do I think have a good argument to make that these are good jobs with good benefits. Again, the challenge is ensuring that is prioritized by state DOTs, prioritized by transit agencies, and in many cases that's just poor management or a lack of forward thinking.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Westerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. As we consider this important reauthorization, we have to face the fact that we have a real problem in our country that we can't really build things anymore. It took 35 years to build the first 42,000 miles of interstate highway, and in the last 34, we've built 7,000 miles. It's not just that we can't build, we can't really maintain and repair like we're capable of doing. And it's almost to the point of ridiculousness. I have a Forest Service road in my district that had a couple of landslides. This is a gravel road in a very remote area. And so far, there's been $6 million of grants awarded to fix the road, but the timeline is maybe 6 years. And to tell you the truth, nobody really knows who's on first and who's on second and how this is going to get done. And we can do much better than that as a country. And we know that time is money. These delays cost things. And Mr. Dellinger, you know, as a user of the highway system, I think you said it in your testimony, $109 billion a year in delays and burning something like $6.4 billion of fuel sitting in delays. We see those kinds of costs. But then, Mr. Timon, in your testimony, you showed a graph on the IIJA funding, which ranges from about $70 to $80 billion a year over a 5-year period. And it's the $80 billion in 2026 is going to have $40 billion of purchasing power. Also in your testimony, you showed where it takes 6 or 7.6 years to get through the NEPA process. We've got to do better than that for the American people and for everybody paying taxes and everybody that's using our roadways. Mr. Timon, what can we do to allow state transportation departments to do what they do and build roads and do it in a timely manner?
Well, thank you for that question. I think that this has been an issue that Congress has been struggling with for decades now, really. I think that people on both sides of the aisle agree that we need to do more to streamline the project delivery process. As was mentioned, there was one federal decision provision that was provided in IIJA. It has not been fully implemented as Congress intended by the previous administration. We're hopeful that the incoming administration, the Trump administration, will embrace the one federal decision and the intent behind the timelines associated with that provision and implement it in the way that Congress intended. Some other ideas is, as I mentioned, in Georgia, they've decided to co-locate and collaborate federal resource agencies together in one interagency office to help make sure that everybody's working on a project in the most efficient way. Trying to find ways to consolidate duplicative permits and reviews overseen by Coast Guard and Army Corps of Engineers and the National Marine Fisheries Services and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, making sure that those things are happening concurrently, and that if there are duplicative permits by multiple resource agencies, there's only one that you need to do as opposed to the same one over and over again for different resource agencies. So those are just a few.
Yeah, there's a project that should have been done in my district many, many years ago. It's Interstate 49 that goes from New Orleans up to Kansas City and provides interstate highway. But the section in Arkansas is kind of the missing link to finishing that project. I did some research. Here's the environmental impact statement from 1997. This is the executive summary that's 37 pages long. The actual EIS is 566 pages long, and the Arkansas Department of Transportation tells me they have to go back and redo the whole thing before they could do that project if they were to get funding for it. I want to ask everybody on the panel, is reforming NEPA critical to getting more for our infrastructure dollars? Mr. Timon?
I'll start and say absolutely, and not just NEPA, but also looking at the underlying resource protection laws that are in place. Many of those have not been modernized or looked at in over 40 or 50 years. We're not saying that they need to be eliminated, just modernized.
Streamlined, made to work quickly. Anybody else want to weigh in on that quickly? You've got a whole 7 seconds. I'll yield that back to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nadler, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our witnesses for coming here. I am eager to begin reauthorizing our nation's surface transportation programs, particularly those under the Federal Highway Administration's jurisdiction. However, I must first address the deeply troubling issue of President Trump's hastily and poorly drafted executive order titled Unleashing American Energy that at least temporarily triggered an entirely avoidable crisis. In the misguided attempt to pause funding for electric vehicle charging stations and similar programs, the order inexplicably froze a substantial portion of critical bipartisan infrastructure law funding, including FHWA resources. This egregious misstep forced the agency to shut down systems states depend on to process highway project agreements and reimbursements, effectively halting access to $383 billion in Highway Trust Fund contract authority and endangering infrastructure projects nationwide. While the administration sent out a memorandum late yesterday to attempt to correct this error, this committee should swiftly address the issue and ensure that the flow of essential infrastructure funding to the states continues without further delay. Mr. Timon, in your testimony, you emphasized the importance of stable federal funding for state DOTs. Could you elaborate on the potential impacts of any funding pause on project timelines, costs, and state DOTs' ability to effectively leverage federal funds?
Well, thank you for that question. I do believe that yesterday the pause that occurred was more of a miscommunication than what the intent of the administration was, and we did work with folks at USDOT and OMB to make sure that that was quickly corrected. So our hope is that there is no hangover effect associated with that short-term pause.
Do you think that correction completely solves the problem that was caused?
My hope is that it did, but before close of business yesterday, we did have assurances from USDOT that the flow of federal dollars to states for the vast majority of the programs authorized under IIJA would continue as normal. So I don't believe there was much of an impact, if any, to reimbursements for states.
Thank you. Mr. Colvin, your testimony highlighted a notable increase in transit ridership through the third quarter of 2024, with cities like Milwaukee and Madison experiencing impressive growth. You also emphasized the critical role public transportation plays in driving economic prosperity and the importance of stable federal funding for sustaining transit operations. What specific actions can Congress take to ensure stable funding and mitigate the impact of political uncertainty on the implementation of vital transit projects?
Well, I think guaranteeing that as much of the funding as we can has been a big change. That predictable funding is important, as important in public transit as it is in highway construction. I think there were other things that we did though in this bill that I think have been really important in driving the return to transit post-COVID. I think public safety has been a big sort of driver in terms of turning people away from transit, and I think the work that we've done to bring workers into the fold of safety planning at transit agencies, I think that's starting to pay off. I think people are seeing that it is safer, and it's, I think, 100% because we brought the voice of workers into that planning process. So I think it does go beyond just money, but certainly I think we have treated transit as sort of like a less than in this country for many years, and I think in many ways that's just because they see, some people see it as an urban issue and not sort of something that's enjoyed universally. I think something that everyone should be looking at is the success of rural transit post-COVID recovery. The rural transit, I think, has had the biggest, quickest bounce back. I feel like beyond stable funding, it is just investment in making sure that these are predictable services, that they are growing service, that people can count on it, that it is all making a difference.
Thank you, Mr. Colvin. Your testimony underscored the impressive addition of 10,000 new transit workers over the past year, a remarkable recovery from the challenges faced during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. How can Congress enhance and expand training programs in the upcoming reauthorization to equip transit workers with the skills necessary to operate and maintain advancing transit technologies safely?
Well, we simply need more investment in training. I think traditionally transit has been well below, in terms of total payroll invested into training, well below averages in any other industry. I think we're starting to see a change in that now, but while we did make significant investments in workforce training for new technologies, electrification, there's not sort of an across-the-board national strategy when it comes to investing in our transit workforce, and I think that needs to change.
Thank you, Mr. Colvin. I yield back.
Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to speak to the comments of my good friend, Ranking Member Larson made earlier. The American people rejected the policies of the last administration in November. It is absolutely the Trump administration's prerogative to review the policies and programs of the last administration to ensure taxpayer dollars are being used effectively and responsibly. Projects like roads, bridges, and airports will certainly align with these principles. But when we talk about $7.4 billion of American taxpayer money going to build charging stations with the Buy American provisions removed, and 11 have been built in the last 3 years, that's what this administration will be reviewing. We do need to stop wasting money on many ineffective projects and reinvest in hard infrastructure that makes the American public, traveling public, make it safer and better for them. $7.4 billion, 11 charging stations. Mr. Timon, thanks for your service. You've been around a long time, and I read your bio, and thanks for putting in the time. I appreciate that. In 2007, the I-35 bridge collapsed in downtown Minneapolis. Can anybody tell me how long it took to replace that bridge? It's 10 lanes right now. 13 months, okay? So my colleague from Arkansas, Bruce Westerman, talked about the NEPA process. That bridge went down. We needed safe transportation across the river. In 13 months, the federal government and the state of Minnesota got it done. The NEPA process, Mr. Timon, the NEPA process you had mentioned earlier is slow, and we know that historically, if that I-35 bridge went through the process, it would be 8 to 10 years before it was built. When you delay projects, Mr. Timon, would you say that cost the taxpayers money?
Every year there is a delay, absolutely. There is an increase in the cost of the project.
So you take my home state of Minnesota. When freeze-up happens, it's hard to build in December. You can't. So it stops December, and it doesn't come, you can't start building till the May, the road restrictions are off. So we've lost 5+ months already. Every delay of NEPA, the redundancy, the duplication of federal resources and state resources. I think the states do a very good job of making sure that the laws are followed and the environment is taken care of. When you have two processes following each other, one can get snagged up and stop projects for many years. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I would say that I was a staffer for this committee in 2007 when the I-35W bridge collapsed. Mr. Oberstar was I believe, the chair of the committee at that point, and or the ranking member. And you are absolutely right. It was rebuilt in an expedited fashion. It would be great to see projects like that rebuilt or built at the same timeline when there isn't the urgency of an emergency that we see time and time again, whether it's I-85 in Atlanta, I-95 in Connecticut earlier this year, I-95 in Philadelphia a couple of years ago. We were able to rebuild those facilities extremely quickly because there was an urgency around an emergency. It would be great to see that urgency around regular projects as well.
Our NEPA process, in my opinion, needs to be changed to reflect the speed that we need to develop without changing the laws or the environmental protections or the labor standards. And I think that permitting, when we talk about permitting reform, these are projects that are going to save the American taxpayer. Our small communities oftentimes can't afford the delay. to be able to wait 2 or 3 years, because it's just additional money. And then when you ask our cities and towns to pay for it because of the unnecessary delays, what do? They have to go to their local taxpayers. It's simply unacceptable. And Mr. Timon, it's a breath of fresh air to hear you talk about the need for reform and the need to do these projects in a timely fashion, because it's going to save the American taxpayer money. And Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Ms. McDonald-Rivet, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Ms. Kavanoki, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes, you did.
For context, I want to tell you that I represent a district in Michigan. We're right here in the middle, and have significant rural communities. We have rural roads, county roads, many of them dirt roads. I appreciate the reference to that. But we know with the severe weather events that are increasing around our road maintenance costs across Michigan, considering the IIJ's limitations in addressing inflation and rising construction costs, which I hear about all the time, what reforms to federal funding programs would you suggest are needed to help rural communities like the ones in my district compete for these federal funds and afford the necessary upgrades? So as we have tried to fix our roads in Michigan, what we have seen across my district is the roads are just continuing to disintegrate, and wanting to be able to have our communities have a fair shot at some of these federal fundings. Do you have suggestions?
Thank you. That is a great question, and I'd like to be able to follow up in more detail with you afterwards. I think some of this depends on how your state DOT works with those rural communities and how funds are distributed, how are they prioritized. The planning process, at least as I understand it on its face, should actually be taking care of that and getting those dollars to those needs. Now, building on some themes that we've heard here today, part of dealing with inflation is getting projects done in a timely manner. Project today is going to cost a whole lot more in the years to come, and so being able to speed that project delivery along is going to be significant, I think, to those areas.
Completely agree. But as we think about, and what we have seen historically is, as construction costs go up and dollars don't go as far, we end up seeing, and Mr. Timon, perhaps you can respond to this as well, that the communities like the ones in my district are left behind as larger municipalities get dollars to, and more populated areas of the state get those dollars, right? So we never seem to get to the front of the line, and I'm wondering what safeguards can be put in place.
So I do think that both the metropolitan planning and the statewide planning process are meant to address the needs of communities across the entire state, including rural areas. But you're absolutely right that there are certain instances where, say, a project has been planned to move forward, the cost, and even if there was funding identified for it, either at the local level or at the state level, and then it takes 2 or 3 years longer to do that project, well, the cost is increased from what the original estimate is. And oftentimes that means that the local community is left holding the bag and trying to have to make up the difference. So I know that state DOTs across the country are struggling with that. I know that even discretionary grant recipients under the IIJA who put in an application for, say, one of those programs 2 or 3 years ago, assuming that the cost is a certain amount, well, when they finally get that grant and sign an agreement 2 or 3 years later, the cost may have increased 20 or 30%. And maybe they've been successful in getting the federal grant, but now they have to make up that difference of the increase of 20 or 30%. And that's hard to do for localities who don't have necessarily a revenue source that's available to dedicate to that cost increase.
I think you're exactly right. I live in a community, represent a community that was responsible for the repair of 2 bridges that just disintegrated at a rate that wasn't keeping time with the funding that was coming, and ended up with repair costs that were more than 4 times their entire annual budgets, right? This is something that we hear all across my district. Thank you very much. I yield the rest of my time.
Mr. Johnson is now recognized.
Thank you very much. Clearly, when we're talking about the surface transportation bill, it's a good reminder about the interconnectedness of these assets. We're not talking about 50 different state systems. We're really talking about one national system. That's what can be a little frustrating about the donor-donee conversations sometimes we have. The idea that some states are subsidizing others. I mean, the reality is that when you look at the South Dakota truck traffic, 60% of it neither originates nor terminates in South Dakota. This is really about one country making sure that we can access national and global markets. But it's not just about the money. It's also about sometimes regulatory roadblocks that we have in place that make it harder for people to be able to get goods delivered. And so, Mr. Dellinger, as I shift to you, and I'm thinking about some of those really safe drivers we have who might be younger than 21, Congress has, in a couple of instances in recent years, had pilot projects where we want to try to make it easier for those young drivers to move from one state to the other. We know that 49 states and the District of Columbia allow CDLs for people who are younger than 21, and yet we don't allow nationally, outside of pilot programs, for younger drivers to be able to cross state lines. Mr. Dellinger, teach us a little bit. Is there any evidence that suggests an otherwise safe 20-year-old driver shouldn't be able to cross state lines and have that CDL be effective?
Well, as you mentioned, 49 states do recognize intra-state driving for under 21. You know, I mentioned earlier that the pilot program was a bit flawed to begin with, and it got a late start, and a lot of carriers did not jump on board because of the confusion that existed early on. That program sunsets in November of this year. And so basically, you know, we do need something to be more on a permanent basis. And I think the Drive Safe Act that maybe was introduced in the 118th may need to be reintroduced and looked at as well. So. But I think, you know, looking at the current program, there were not a lot of participants. I think it allowed for 3,000. I think it was maybe 3 dozen in the program. So definitely needs to be relooked at more on a permanent, not just a pilot program.
Well, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the data we have with these drivers at the state level, again, they're able to drive in 49 states in the district, is that these can be really safe drivers. They don't create some sort of wildly disproportionate impact on surface transportation safety. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, and you know, when we look at our industry, we're typically bringing people in that are second and third careers. And if we were able to bring someone in and be their first career and train them in a safe manner where before they got habits that were not conducive to our industry. So.
Mr. Chairman, I would just note that this should be an area where we all come to an agreement, that if you're a safe driver and you're able to, I mean, it's amazing, you know, somebody can drive from Rapid City, South Dakota to Sioux Falls, South Dakota for, I don't know what that would be, maybe 300 miles, but they can't go from North Sioux City, South Dakota to Sioux City, Iowa, just a few miles. It doesn't really make any sense. It creates all of these unnecessary barriers, federal government created barriers. Let's try to work together so that we can drive down the costs of operation. We can create outstanding careers for safe young drivers. So absolutely, it can be their first career. I would also note there's been some good conversations about the need to have less federal bureaucracy around the whole NEPA process. I would call the committee's attention again to my interactive, basically an e-NEPA, that we would have a cloud-based system that would make it much easier for these agencies to hand off their various parts of the review. Our antiquated analog NEPA process slows down siting and permitting. As this committee knows, making American siting and permitting more efficient is one of my passion projects. So I just want to thank a number of you for raising this issue. Listen, let's pass Dusty's bill and then everything will be fixed. Thanks much. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Freedom from California is now recognized.
Thank you, Chair Rouser and Ranking Member Norton. I'm really honored to be a part of this committee, and I look forward to working together with everybody on the smart investments that we need. As a former chair of the Transportation Committee in the California Legislature, I'm also very much looking forward to learning from each and every one of you. I do represent Los Angeles, which, as you all know, has been devastated over the last couple of weeks by wildfires. That's really permeating all of my thoughts right now, including how I think about transportation and the work of this committee. Those fires have taken at least 27 lives. They've destroyed over 15,000 structures, many of them primary homes for our families. And my thoughts, and I'm sure many of our thoughts, are with the people of Los Angeles right now. Over 60,000 people have applied for FEMA assistance at this point, and close to 200,000 people have been under evacuation orders, mandatory evacuation orders. And as we move into recovery, I think we all know that that recovery has to be very thoughtful. And one thing I'd like to just draw attention to is that when we think about transportation, I think many of us think about it in just the terms of transportation, roads and transit and bridges. But I also want to point out that I have thought for many years, and a lot of my work in the legislature in California has centered around the fact that transportation is also very linked, particularly in our urban areas, to building housing and to being able to build the housing that we need. If we don't fix transportation, you can't get people around their communities. Neighborhoods don't want to allow new residents in because they're worried about the impacts of parking and congestion is always top of people's minds in Los Angeles. And now as we're having to rebuild, we need to think about transportation as part of that recovery effort. It's even more important that we do this in a way that allows us to build not just the housing that we need for people who are displaced, but also the housing that we needed to build even prior to these disasters because of overcrowding and homelessness and housing shortage that we have felt very deeply in California. So first, I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Timon, and I really appreciate all of the witnesses for being here today, and even despite the snowstorm. The bipartisan infrastructure law created several new formula programs, including the Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, which just happens to work out to be the project program. Amazing how that worked out. To help make surface transportation more resilient to natural hazards, including extreme weather events like we saw in Los Angeles. As my community looks to rebuild, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how the state DOTs utilize the critical funding provided in the bipartisan infrastructure law to improve resiliency to natural disasters and the continued impact of global warming, and also if you could opine on what Los Angeles in particular should expect to see over the next coming months, over the next coming of years, due to that program.
Well, thank you for that question. And first, let me just say that our thoughts and prayers are with the folks of California and specifically the Los Angeles area with the wildfires. I would say that that program in particular is really designed for state DOTs to be able to look at their infrastructure network and figure out where they need to build it in a more resilient manner so that it is hardened against the types of catastrophes that you're talking about, whether it's wildfires like you're seeing in California, or if it's the hurricanes that we saw earlier this fall that impacted Florida and Georgia and North Carolina and Tennessee and Kentucky and South Carolina. The impact that you have seen through those disasters demonstrates that we need to be able to look at our nation's infrastructure system and determine what are the most vulnerable assets within our transportation infrastructure inventory and figure out ways to build it up in a way so that it is better protected against those types of disasters that we've seen just in the last few months.
Thank you. Turning to Mr. Colvin, I want to thank you for being here today. As you know, more than 80% of communities across the country are relying on trucks to serve their freight transportation needs, including Los Angeles, and we have several truck routes through my district as well, so we're very familiar with the needs of trucks to be able to operate efficiently and safely. Can you highlight areas where federal investment is needed to better serve, now I'm speaking to communities themselves, to help them get more of what they need in terms of goods moving in and out of their communities and to do so more safely?
Sorry, that was directed?
Well, whoever would like to speak, actually. I think Mr. Dellinger, maybe you're better suited to this.
And would you repeat that? I'm sorry, because I thought you were directing that to Mr.
Sorry, you're right. I did say that because I'm thinking, of labor as well as being key partners in the safety conversation. But just, for communities that are relying on trucking and communities that are impacted by freight routes that go through communities, what you would like to see from the federal government in terms of investments to make people's lives better in these communities?
Well, probably the simple and the short answer is that basically the roads and the bridges are our working space, and investment in that physical working space is what we really need.
Right, and in terms of safety for drivers, is there anything that you think the federal government could be doing better to support the people who are driving these trucks?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pivot a little on that, but I think, NHTSA just put out 280-something page NPRM on automation and automated vehicles, and really turned over the reins to both commercial and non-commercial entities, just to sort of self-describe what they think is safe, and then whether or not they abide by that. I think the NPRM doesn't really offer a lot of guidance. So I think rather than spending time sort of noodling around with technology, they ought to really be focused on doing their core safety role over there. And I think what we saw in San Francisco with these vehicles hitting or almost hitting commercial and non-commercial vehicles on a fairly regular basis, we're going to see a massive expansion of that across the entire country. That will affect all road users, including those working in transportation.
Sure, so the
The
transport...
general lady's time has expired.
Oh, thank you.
Now recognize the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens.
Thank you so much. Mr. Dillinger, in your testimony, you paint the picture of a workforce shortage in the trucking industry. Much of my passion is the work with Congress surrounding opening pathways for careers in industries like yours beyond the traditional educational system. In your opinion, do you think addressing the gap in the trucking workforce would help in addressing the shortfalls in the Highway Trust Fund and other service transportation programs? What would that look like if it is the case?
One of the things, everyone does not have to go to a four-year college. And basically, what we need support is for the vocational schools, for the driver training, for the tech training, the mechanics, the techs, training to look at, federal dollars like the 529 that can be used for college to be able to be used for vocational schools as well. That would be one of the first steps.
Okay. And one of my top priorities is to bridge the gap between prospective young people to industries like yours earlier, before they go into thousands of dollars in debt. Through your experience in leading a company, what would be the most helpful way for Congress to expand the career pathways into the trucking industry? Is there a way to unite these concepts with the surface transportation programs?
I think, again, looking at the Driver Safe Act definitely would be of interest to us to get young people in, and also looking at federal dollars for training.
Well, just know you have an advocate on our education workforce. We have tremendous talents. We need to make sure they're tied into some great careers, and opportunities. So just know we'll be working with you on that. Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Now recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Gillen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Holmes Norton. I'm looking forward to working with you and the members of the subcommittee on a bipartisan basis to advance critical surface transportation reauthorization this Congress. And thank you to all the witnesses joining us today. Mr. Colvin, a report this month from TRIP, which is a national transportation research nonprofit, found that poor roads in New York, in the New York metropolitan area, including Long Island, where I represent, cost to drivers is nearly $3,500 each year. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit a copy of the TRIP report and an article in our local paper, Newsday, into the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Colvin, even with critical investments from the bipartisan infrastructure law, too many of our roads, up to 30% in the New York metropolitan area, remain in poor condition, harming my constituents and our economy. What are some of the ways that you believe Congress can ensure the upcoming surface transportation bill goes further towards improving our roads and reducing our costs for drivers?
I think a lot of it is just a question of resources. I think there was a comment made at the outset of the hearing that, it's sort of not an endless checkbook, but I think, the This is not money that we are putting into reams of paper. These are actual investments that have demonstrable returns, and I think we ought to treat it like that. So if it requires that we spend more money, we should spend more money. It is an investment in this country, and we ought to be focused on that.
Thank you. Mr. Dellinger, what is the estimated annual impact on the trucking industry of our unsafe roads and highways? And if you could break down some of those costs, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Would you repeat that?
Sure. What is the estimated annual impact on the trucking industry of our unsafe roads and highways? And if you could break that down a little bit, be helpful.
Basically, I mean, congestion is probably the biggest cost that we see. And not only affects our industry, but affects the motoring public out there as well. And basically, in my written statement, we estimated close to $109 billion a year. And I did mention earlier, which is equivalent to 435,000 drivers sitting idle for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So a big cost.
And how do you think we can alleviate that cost?
Bottlenecks. I know ATRI, which is American Transportation Research Institute, each year publishes the top 100 bottlenecks. And I think it is distributed to this committee and putting efforts as we choose projects on those bottlenecks.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Colvin, just back again to the TRIP report. It also found that costs from inflation have eroded up to $1.2 billion worth of core construction funding over the past 5 years. Would you agree that Congress needs to increase, I think you already actually answered this, the overall funding for our highway programs to help account for the increased cost of materials and labor?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And one thing I would also encourage is, people talk about the IIJA as a trillion-plus program. The amount of money that actually went towards the surface transportation reauthorization portion of that, it wasn't, it was significant, but I think we need to spend the amount of money that it takes to keep our systems in a state of good repair and to keep up with demand on them. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair, I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Timon, according to the latest American Society of Civil Engineers, they had a report card that the nation's overall infrastructure grade was a C, actually C minus. Do you believe that this accurately reflects the state of our infrastructure today?
I think that assessment is a good approximation of the totality of the infrastructure network.
Can you shed light on why you think that?
Well, I think that we've been underinvesting in our nation's transportation infrastructure for a number of years. The federal government only with IIJA really kind of stepped up their investment. When you look at the last 5 or 6 federal surface transportation bills, they have not seen a level of investment that is consistent with what the needs are out there within our nation. So, going all the way back to maybe ICE-T and T21, you saw fairly significant increases. Safety-Lou, smaller percentage increase. MAP-21, smaller percentage. The FAST Act, and then this last bill did provide a significant increase in investment of our nation's infrastructure. But I would say that what we've said is kind of the bread and butter of the surface transportation programs are the highway formula dollars that go back to states. They only saw about a 20% increase in IIJA. And that 20% increase was eaten up almost entirely by the cost of inflation. So when IIJA was passed, a lot of states thought they'd be able to ramp up the number of projects they'd be able to do. But inflation pretty much ate up that entire increase, and they were lucky to not have to pull back on other projects that they had planned. So they were lucky to be able to just continue with kind of the baseline with that 20% increase because of inflation.
I know in my own state of Missouri, I-44 is heavily overused and desperately needs expansion. And my question is there a way that we can get more bang out of our buck, right? Get more out of the dollars that we're spending? And so in your testimony, you said that the federal government tends to be more expensive compared to each non-federal dollar that's because of the regulations of permitting. Could you expand on what you mean when you say each federal dollar is more expensive?
Sure. So first, I would say that Missouri has done an excellent job over the last 10 years of increasing revenue at the state level in order to be able to provide state resources to try to address some of the challenges that they have seen. But really, at the end of the day, state dollars are easier to utilize on these projects than federal dollars because of all the bureaucratic red tape that goes along with them. You have states such as Utah that say that they're only going to use federal dollars on the simplest and easiest of projects, essentially only to do repaving, because they don't want to get into the federal requirements that are associated with using federal dollars on more complex projects. So states are making that value proposition themselves and saying state dollars are easier to use on the more complex projects, so we're going to use state dollars. If we make the federal process more similar to what we see in most states and make it a lot simpler and easier, you will get more bang for your federal dollar that way, the same way that a lot of states get more bang for their state dollars than they get for their federal dollars.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dellinger, you cite in your testimony that the driver shortage is currently one of the greatest challenges in the trucking industry. It's facing 60,000 drivers shortage just in 2023. Can you expand on the current state of the driver shortage and the impact on getting products shipped, which is the American people, what the American people need?
Well, currently, we've had a little leveling in that due to the freight recession that we've experienced in our industry. So it's not been as severe, but when we talk about, one of the words that's not in there is qualified drivers. I think there are drivers out there, and there are arguments about our numbers, but having qualified drivers, sometimes you need drivers that are qualified to drive tankers, to drive bulk fuel, to drive hazardous materials, and maybe they're not qualified in those areas.
And then lastly, last question is, I increasingly hear about the shortage or availability of parking, safe parking structures. Can you elaborate on that?
And I spoke to that earlier as well, but we need safe parking for entry level for more females, where they feel safe, where they feel comfortable, and also for the safety. I mean, if you travel your state's highways and probably at night or in the early mornings and look on the on-ramps and off-ramps, you'll see trucks parked there because there was not safe and adequate parking in rest areas or facilities which they were making deliveries.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Figures from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Ranking Member. Thank you guys for the opportunity. I won't spend a lot of time with a preface because I do want to leave some time for some answers, particularly from the panelists from my home state of Alabama, Ms. Kavanaugh. But I'll start with you, Mr. Colvin. I know at the end of the day, these transportation projects, these infrastructure projects, they boil down to workers on the ground. The ability to have qualified workers that want to be in the profession, that are highly skilled and highly trained for the jobs that we need. Can you just explain to us a little bit of the importance of prioritizing those workforce development programs to ensure that we have that highly qualified workforce, and also a little bit on, we know that wages consistently fail to rise with inflation, and the struggles that is presenting as it relates to that workforce?
I mean, I'll start with the second one. I think, we hear a lot about so-called workforce shortages, and I think really it's the challenges there is it's not a workforce shortage, it's a shortage of employers who are willing to pay livable wages to their workers and afford them a quality of life and work that people are attracted to. I think that's a problem in the trucking industry. I think it undermines that more when Congress goes after hours of service rules in states that are trying to do the right thing. But that is something that I think thinking that you can solve that problem by now going after, the 18 to 21-year-old demographic as though they're going to be more attracted to just the same quality of job, I think it's a bit of an oversight. So I think we do need to give real serious thought to that issue, not as a workforce shortage issue, but as a shortage of good employers. With regard to workforce training, I think the sort of the benefit that we all enjoyed of massive increases in funding from the IIJA, it does create a problem that you're suddenly increasing spending by a huge amount, and you do need to prepare a workforce for that. So, to the extent that there's a gap there, I think the best thing we can do going forward is keep sustained higher levels of spending to meet the actual demand on our systems and have a predictable pipeline of workers as well.
And Ms. Kavanoki, you, or Vulcan rather, is currently in the midst of a very somewhat unique, but certainly sincere dispute with the Mexican government that is having a direct impact on transportation and infrastructure projects here in the United States. Can you give us a little bit more context, educate some of us who don't know about this issue, and sort of update those of us who are aware of this issue on what's going on there?
Sure, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to do that because it really brings together multiple issues related to surface transportation. Rock only is where rock is, right? So there are a lot of areas of this country, coastally, all up the West Coast, across the Gulf Coast, where there's no indigenous rock to quarry. You got to get the rock there somehow. The most efficient way to do that, the most cost-effective way to do that is by blue water vessel. Otherwise, you've got to put it on rail, move it longer distances. So in 1986, Vulcan embarked on a project in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, which was then a fishing village with no telephones, no roads, no infrastructure, to create a limestone quarry that would supply now 14 ports that stretch from Texas up into South Carolina. And we really appreciate that this committee and others saw fit to create the exemption in Buy America for aggregates and cementitious materials for that. That was the critical reason for that exemption. You just can't get rock where it doesn't exist. Unfortunately, we have been embroiled in an issue directly with the Mexican government. The former president of Mexico directly ordered the shutdown of our operations in May of 2022. We still have 250 employees, Mexican nationals who we are paying, but we are not operating. Then, as he was on his way out the door, President López Obrador expropriated our property. And the new administration has doubled down on that expropriation. They have claimed that they're turning it into what they call a naturally protected area. To be clear, the only thing prohibited in this naturally protected area is quarrying and export through the only deep water port in the Yucatan Peninsula, which we built, developed, and operated. So we have issues related to national security, we have issues related to the supply of materials in the Gulf Coast, and certainly significant issues related to the treatment of U.S. companies investing abroad.
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here to testify before the committee today. Not to pick favorites, but especially Mr. Dellinger, who's a fellow North Carolinian. It's good to see you here today, sir. Mr. Dellinger, in your testimony, you discuss how the poor condition of freight intermodal connectors across the country creates supply chain bottlenecks, and we've established that this is a massive driver of costs. Intermodal connectors are crucial last mile connectors between highways and ports and railroads and airports, yet the Federal Highway Administration rated over half of intermodal connectors as being mediocre or as being in mediocre or poor condition. You report that these roadways often get pushed to the back burner when funding decisions are made. So how do you make the case to local jurisdictions for prioritizing investment in freight intermodal connectors?
And that is a difficult situation to actually work with the local municipalities or cities to do that. And it's very important that I think that the federal government gets involved in these connectors, these railheads, these port heads as well, because that's places also that you will find a tremendous amount of congestion in as well.
So why do you think that it's important to specifically set aside funding for these types of projects?
For the flow of traffic, for the flow of commerce as well. So.
Oh, yeah. So one of the surprising statistics in your testimony was the highway congestion added over $100 billion to the cost of freight transportation in 2022 alone due to idling trucks and slower traffic speeds. And it follows that highway capacity improvements could reduce traffic jams and lower the operational cost to the trucking industry. Can you provide an example of a state or federal policy that discourages capacity improvements or downgraded a highway in the name of environmental justice?
I cannot do that, no.
So let's game out the costs and long-term effects that the California Air Resources Board emission standards would have on the trucking industry. Can you speak to that?
Well, basically, a company our size does not have the resources to invest in, I'm going to say, what is new technology. We're game on doing and working, but we want proven technology, and right now EVs are not proven. Basically, we're in the long-haul business. We run from North Carolina to California, and the infrastructure is not there. And, we can fuel a truck in 15, 20 minutes and run 1,200, 1,500 miles. Whereas now, if you even had the network to do it and had to charge overnight to run 200 or 300 miles, what kind of disruption would that bring to the economy, the commerce as well?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dellinger, what role do sustainable fuels such as renewable diesel and renewable natural gas play in reducing emissions in the near term, and how can Congress support their adoption?
Well, basically, those are proven solutions in our industry with the combustible engines to be able to use renewable energies. And basically, they are cleaner. And right now, as I mentioned, that the EVs are technology that we're not there. We're nowhere near being close to operating that type of equipment in a long-haul environment. I think it's something that would work well in municipalities and cities if they want to convert their buses, their trash trucks, their school buses. Would definitely be a workable solution, but right now, definitely not in the long-haul market.
Thank you. The recent floods in the Southeast and fires in California demonstrate the critical need for trucks to respond quickly to disasters, whether to clear roadways for emergency equipment or to transport water to fight forest fires. Congress authorized states to issue overweight permits for trucks responding to disasters, but I understand that the trucking industry faces significant bureaucratic hurdles. Can you tell me what we can do to improve the system?
Well, our industry is one of the first to respond, to haul water, to haul food, to haul equipment necessary to clear out. I think supporting the MOVE Act, the 118th Congress had in place, maybe introducing it as well in the 119th, which allows the governors to issue permits actually before a natural disaster is called, and actually looking beyond, what qualifies for a disaster, and as well, maybe even the time of the event.
Thank you. Mr. Timon, can you comment about the importance of maintaining permit requirements for overweight trucks?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. I do think that there is a balance that needs to be struck when it comes to overweight vehicles, especially in times of need or emergency, making sure that there are opportunities for trucks to be able to respond to specific situations from an emergency standpoint. But that also needs to be balanced with the ability to preserve and maintain our nation's highway infrastructure. So when you're looking at the potential damage that overweight vehicles do to bridges and roadway pavement, we need to make sure that there's a balance there. But certainly when it comes to permitting overweight vehicles, we're working to identify ways to streamline that process for interstate travel to make sure that permits that are issued by multiple states can be done in a more coordinated fashion so that it is more efficient for somebody with an overweight load traveling from, say, California all the way to New York, that we're looking for ways to streamline that process to obtain all of the permits for the individual states along that route.
Thank you. Ms. Kavanaughke, can you explain why we need to maintain the Build America, Buy America Act exclusions for aggregate materials?
Sure.
Giving you a softball.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think it comes right back to, God put rocks where God put rocks. And so there are about 30 million tons of rock that not just Vulcan Materials, but other companies bring into the U.S. from Canada and Caribbean nations every year to supplement and to provide for infrastructure. It's particularly important from Texas across to Florida and up to South Carolina, but we also do this in California. We have a terminal in Long Beach where we bring rock in from Canada. So it's a way to do it cost effectively and efficiently. It's a way to it's a way to address environmental issues, but it's really critical to the supply of rock in the United States, and we appreciate that exemption very much.
Thank you. Ms. Kavanaughke, is the federal aid highway program designed around multi-year apportion funding? And what provisions in Title 23 depend on states having multi-year funding?
There's a tremendous amount of Title 23 that states are required to look on a year-over-year basis. For example, states have multi-year planning requirements. Even sometimes the simplest projects are going to take multiple years to get done. So the very nature of what is essentially a capital program requires that backdoor capital budget with contract authority in that multi-year program.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back. I'm out of time.
Mr. Taylor from Ohio.
Thank you, Chairman Burleson and Ranking Member Norton, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to our...
Pull that microphone a little closer to you, or it may not be on.
It's lit up. Is it working?
There you go.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Chairman Burleson and Ranking Member Norton, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. As a third-generation business owner in the concrete industry, I know firsthand how important it is that our highways, roads, and bridges across the United States are safe for commuters, citizens, and businesses. With the upcoming Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill, I want to ensure that we are passing common sense legislation that will fix our roads, ensure safety, and help the United States economy grow. Mr. Timon, in your testimony, I was interested to read about Georgia's initiatives that ensured that electrical vehicles paid their fair share into the Highway Trust Fund. Specifically, you mentioned enacting an annual electric vehicle registration fee, establishing a heavy vehicle impact fee, and a kilowatt-hour fee for public electric vehicle charging. With 90% of total federal highway programs coming from the Highway Trust Fund, I find it absurd that those who choose to drive electric vehicles are not helping pay for the maintenance and upkeep on the roads that we all drive on, even as electric vehicles cause more wear and tear on our roads than gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles. Mr. Timon, if Congress enacted Georgia's initiative on the federal level, would this help alleviate the Highway Trust Fund solvency issue?
Well, thank you for that question, Congressman. I appreciate you pointing out what Georgia has done. And again, if Commissioner McMurray were here, he would, I think, be able to talk about the impact that it has had on revenue in Georgia specifically. Certainly, as electric vehicles grow as a percentage of the fleet in the future, we're going to need to find a way to have them pay into the system from a user fee standpoint. Right now, the Highway Trust Fund is supported primarily by the gas tax, which is a proxy for use on our nation's transportation system. And because electric vehicles do not obviously consume gas, they're not paying in. So I think there are a lot of states across the country that have enacted some type of a fee in order to approximate use of the system for electric vehicles. And I do think it's something that Congress should take a look at as they look at reauthorization for the next year, how electric vehicles could pay into the federal Highway Trust Fund.
Thank you. Mr. Timon, thank you for including in your testimony that it could cost up to $200,000 for local governments to develop a discretionary grant application. It's a very significant issue in my district. Most local cities and municipalities cannot spare $200,000 on a chance to receive federal funds to repair failing bridges, potholes, or even repaving a road that has become undrivable. Even worse, according to your testimony, it took the city of Athens, Georgia, 2 years to receive funding after it was awarded to them. 2 years is unacceptable to rural communities who drastically need funding to repair or build infrastructure. I'll open this question up to the whole panel. What specific actions need to be taken by Congress to ensure awardees receive their funds in under a year, especially our rural communities that cannot afford a full-time grant writer?
Well, I do think that one way to do that is to streamline the process at the federal level. Right now, as you mentioned, there's just a lot of bureaucratic red tape that happens at USDOT and FHWA to provide that funding and get a grant agreement, especially with a locality. State DOTs are used to dealing with federal dollars. They have an established relationship with the Federal Highway Administration. Those grants can absolutely be expedited if they treat them like they do formula dollars and just assume that states are able to administer that the way they're able to administer over $40 billion of formula dollars in a year. So I do think there are ways to streamline this by just addressing the bureaucratic red tape that exists in the discretionary programs.
Any other witnesses want to weigh in on that one? Okay. And just, since I have a couple seconds left, when we talked about the fees for the electric vehicles, in your experience, how comparable are they to what you get from say, a diesel truck for their use of the highway in a year?
Well, it does vary from state to state, but most states have tried to set the fees for passenger vehicles equivalent to what a passenger vehicle would pay in gas tax over the course of that year, so that it is essentially a fair treatment of electric vehicles comparable to what vehicles that are powered by internal combustion engines.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Stanton, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses for being here at this important hearing. I have dedicated my career to infrastructure investment. As my previous job, mayor of Phoenix, I oversaw the largest investment in infrastructure to date in Arizona, a 35-year, $32 billion transportation infrastructure plan expanding light rail, bus routes, road maintenance and repairs, bikeability and walkability as well, generating millions and millions of dollars for Arizona. Infrastructure investment is some of the smartest ways to spend taxpayer dollars. Investment in transportation is investment in our economy, investment in our workforce. So you can imagine my concern when I read Section 7 of President Trump's executive order unleashing American energy issued January 20th. The EO had broad language. Taken at face value, it could put the bipartisan infrastructure law dollars at risk. Last night, I sent a letter to the acting secretary of the Department of Transportation asking for immediate clarification. Without clarification, we do not know the true impact of this order, what it means for ongoing funding of bipartisan infrastructure law dollars. I saw this morning the White House put out a memorandum to clarify that the agency, quote, heads may disperse funds as they deem necessary after consulting with the Office of Management and Budget. That provided some clarification, but not enough. Too much ambiguity, too much uncertainty around disbursement of these dollars that this Congress voted for in a bipartisan way. And that uncertainty, that ambiguity is unacceptable to the people on this committee, and it's unacceptable to the American people. Right now, back home in Arizona, construction crews are working to widen I-10 south of Phoenix with the promise of $95 million in federal funding. This project was a bipartisan priority. Business leaders, elected officials at all levels of government, rural, urban, tribal leaders, all coming together to push us over the finish line. If the executive order is not further clarified to make it clear, this puts billions of dollars in materials and labor at risk. These investments are important. It's important to upgrade Arizona's airports, water infrastructure, roads and bridges, railways, and more. Things that this very committee has worked on in a bipartisan way, and I am hopeful, and we should demand in a bipartisan way, that more information and more clarity comes out today. Now I'll move on to a couple questions. As we look to our infrastructure future and advancing the next surface transportation bill, a lot of attention will be placed on sustainable building materials. This is a topic that I have spent time on in Congress to ensure that we have the resources available to build infrastructure in a more sustainable and resilient way. In fact, the ROCKS Act that was folded into the bipartisan infrastructure law specifically directs a working group in the Federal Highway Administration to study and use aggregates and recommended practices and policies to ensure continued access to this important resource for growing communities. Vulcan is one of our largest material providers in Arizona and will have a key role in delivering this future. Ms. Cavanochi, could you describe some of the efforts underway by Vulcan and the aggregates industry to deliver sustainable materials to market?
Certainly. Sustainability for Vulcan has long been a part of what we do. When you operate in people's backyards, you've got to do it well. And so our commitments to people, safety and health, communities, environmental stewardship are built into everything we do. And that's reflected in our products. Sustainable mix design is business as usual in our concrete line of business. We're using carbon cure technology, 1L cement, recycled materials. We've been collaborating on a direct air capture pilot with another private sector company. And then we are currently studying reduced heat requirements for asphalt. We've collaborated on a study of electric and hydrogen vehicle options for our ready-mix fleet. And we're in a number of partnerships with commercial and academic institutions to look at how our products can be used differently, including the use of fines, or very fine materials, for carbon capture, which was something that is fairly novel. So we continue to do this work.
I appreciate your leadership in that regard. Mr. Dellinger, as you likely know, I have a bill to allow vehicles powered primarily by hydrogen fuel cells to exceed certain weight limits on highways. Can you briefly touch on how this legislation would allow states to incorporate sustainable infrastructure?
Basically, it's much like the rule that's already in place for hydrogen vehicles and for electric vehicles as well. So ATA, we do support the bill.
I appreciate that answer, and I will yield back.
Mr. Bresnahan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A little bit about me. I was a heavy highway electrical contractor, signatory to 8 different collective bargaining agreements, and as well as a chairman of a joint apprenticeship training committee. And something that I've seen in the trucking industry, we had over 100 power units, but was the reclassification of marijuana specifically as states start to evolve ahead of federal statutes. So my question would be to Mr. Dellinger, as these different standards change, specifically relating to safety-sensitive positions, what challenges have some of your operators faced, and how have they been able to stay ahead in, as well as in compliance?
I think there's a misconception out there that marijuana or cannabis being legal, that people can operate vehicles under the influence, and that is a problem. We do not have a test that tells us if you are under the influence or not. So we have to rely on the current urine test or the hair test, which tests back. And I guess the struggle we have in our industry is we can't compromise the system we have until there is a workable solution for a test to know whether you are actually under the influence at the time. I think in our company, if we had an accident at any degree and we had a post-random or post-test, accident test, and we tested positive, you know, we would struggle defending anything in that accident. And the retribution we would get for that from the public, from the media, would be astonishing. So our position is that right now, I mean, we have to accept the testing that we have.
Is there anything specifically that Congress can do or advocate for to detect that immediate level of impairment with the half-lives of marijuana remaining inside of systems? I mean, I agree with your sentiments. There's not an immediate detection device to say, yes, this person is under the influence or not under the influence. But is there anything specifically Congress can work on that would add some clarity to the processes?
Without that solution, I do not have the answer.
My next question will be for Mr. Colvin. I want to ask you about apprenticeship programs, and you made mention in your testimony about intelligent transportation systems. That was, in my opinion, one of the most efficient, effective ways to increase travel commute times with congestion in various different highway systems. In my district, we have 22,000 workers in the construction industry, 34,000 in manufacturing, and nearly 30,000 in transportation, warehousing, and the utility systems. We often speak of 21st century workforce, but we're already a quarter way into the century. Technology keeps evolving each day. How can apprenticeship programs close the tech skills gap in worker training? And something that I've seen is that the ITS systems are a very finite industry. So attracting talent into those skill sets, it's really a hybrid technology, and oftentimes it's left under the guidance of the employer to enhance the baseline of skills. How do you feel, again, as members of Congress, we can start to train the next generation of worker?
So I think one of the big problems that we've identified is that we simply aren't collecting good statistical data on what those jobs are going to look like, what the impact of new technologies is on the workforce. And as maybe 5 years ago, the Bureau of Labor Statistics put out a pretty comprehensive report on how they could improve that and the real failures of their current ways of measuring the impacts of technology could be improved to actually sort of quantify what the impacts of these are and help us sort of measure them and anticipate them. And you know, I think there's a lot of folks who think labor's, you know, stands in the way of these technologies. You know, I don't think that could be further from the truth. We want to just be very involved in the conversations about how they're implemented. But if we can't track that, if the industry can't track that, and we're just sort of responding on an ad hoc basis, we're constantly behind the game. And I think that does, you know, it impacts jobs, it impacts our economy. So I would, you know, strongly advise looking at the foundational pieces of this. The data collection and evaluation is really important here.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Moulton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In 2022, over 25,000 people died while using passenger vehicles. 7 died riding passenger trains. Generally, passengers are 18 times more likely to die in a passenger vehicle accident compared to a train. Mr. Colvin, how would moving passengers and freight from highways to rail improve safety conditions and efficiency for all transportation users?
You know, I think whether rail or transit, those are incredibly safe modes of transportation. I think transit, in particular, you know, mile for mile is probably the safest form of transportation in this country. So, you know, expanding those services is going to have a positive impact on safety. It's simply a question of you know, us making sure that we're making those investments in increased rail, passenger rail, and increased transit services.
You know, we've heard a lot of people talk about highway congestion and widening highways and whatnot across the country. Mr. Dellinger, about how many trucks does the average intermodal train take off a highway?
Would you repeat that? I'm sorry.
About how many trucks does one intermodal train take off the highway?
I do not have the answer to that.
About 173.
Thank you.
173 for one train. That's a lot of efficiency. Now, the railroads actually have good partnerships with some of the trucking companies. J.B. Hunt was one of the first. I do a lot of partnerships with shipping companies like UPS. FedEx is a bit behind on this, but they're catching up. When we think about our overall transportation system, and we think about the congestion that so many motorists face on the highways today, you know, there's this option that we don't often consider, which is that if we just got a bunch of long-haul trucks onto trains, sometimes in great partnerships with trucking companies, we'd have a lot less traffic for the trucks that need to be on the highway, not to mention all the people trying to get safely to their destination. What can we do to work on this in a more cooperative, comprehensive fashion?
And you're correct, there are a lot of carriers, a lot of the large ones, and J.B. Hunt is a big one that does that and use intermodal, but I think the intermodal capacity is limited as well. And then you have the expectations of the consumer. Intermodal traffic is not as quick as truck traffic is.
Well, and
our consumers have expectations that.
All right. Well, you keep UPS, if they promise you 3-day service, like they got to get it there in 3 days. UPS is the single biggest intermodal customer in the United States. They figured out how to do it. Seems like they've got decent reliability. Do you ever get a package by UPS, Mr. Dellinger?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and they often come on
Receiving
time.
one today.
Right. All right. Well, there you go. I don't know if that particular one was on a train or not, but in the course of this hearing over the last few hours, I know we've heard a lot from people about widening highways. How many of my colleagues have brought up expanding intermodal service as an alternative to getting traffic down or reducing congestion on our nation's interstates?
I have not heard that today.
Not heard it once, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman's not paying attention, but not heard it once. That just shows that we're really not thinking comprehensively about transportation in this country. But I'm delighted to hear on this panel there are, people like yourself who actually want to talk about this, because every other country in the world thinks about transportation holistically. We don't just have an airline policy or a highway policy. We think about how to solve transportation problems. Virginia has tackled a lot of congestion on I-95 by investing in the CSX right away, entirely paid for by the private sector until now. And that's getting a lot of trucks off the highway, which is making the highway more efficient for the trucks that need to be there, for the motorists, and it also increases safety a lot as well. Speed limiters are one way to improve safety, and I'm pleased that the ATA supports 70-mile-per-hour speed limit. How would limiting truck speeds increase road safety for all users?
ATA has had a policy, and actually the speed limit is 65.
I'm sorry, 65.
Well, it's actually 65 with enhanced, if you have AEB, some of the enhanced safety features that up to 70 miles an hour. So basically as a company, I actually joined a company in 1986. Our speed limit was actually 65 miles an hour, and we've stuck by that even, when we had people that told us that we could get more drivers if we raised the speed limit, but we think it is a safety factor.
Well, thank you for your leadership.
Definitely.
I'm out of time, but Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Shreve, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate our witnesses sharing their expertise with us today. I'm a new member, and this is for those of us that come into this body and on a large committee, subcommittee like this, an extraordinary experience to kind of parachute in and out on these hearings. But I had the opportunity to listen to your what you shared with so many earlier, and so many great questions were taken. But I do want to just introduce myself and thank you for your work. It's a particular honor for me to serve on this committee, given the importance of transportation and infrastructure to Indiana's 6th District. The Crossroads of America is our state's official motto. It was on my Cub Scout and Boy Scout badge when I was a kid. And it's no more than a motto. It's central to our Hoosier identity and central to an economy that is increasingly distribution-based. Indiana's highways support hundreds of billions of dollars of commerce. Freight trucks traverse my district 24/7 across 29,000 lane miles that are supported by NDOT. My district, the 6th District, encompasses portions of the I-465 Beltway and Interstates 65, I-69, I-70, I-74. Significantly, across my district, we are early on in the throes of a crucial renewal project of I-70 from the Marion County, the Indianapolis line, over to the Ohio State border. That's my district. And we're going to, with that, add some desperately needed travel lanes. And as you cross from Ohio into my state, my district, I'm not proud of where we are today from the standpoint of our road condition. But with the work that we're setting upon in today and this bill, I know we can make some headway. Ms. Kavanoki, you may be best prepared to answer this question I have with regard to the design and engineering of a highway rebuild as we go into an era where the electrification in the fullness of time of at least some of the rolling stock, the heavy freight traffic is coming at us. Can you speak generally, very generally, as to the differential in the roadbed engineering for our interstate highways to support over the next few decades the electrified tractor-trailer traffic that will traverse our highway system? That is to say, more generally, will we be looking at a significant do-over right now as we're preparing to design and spend to rebuild a significant slice of I-70 across the district that I now represent?
Thank you for that question. Unfortunately, if I attempted to answer that, the engineers I worked with would get me fired because there's no way I can give you probably the best or right answer on that. I can tell you that moving to electrification, as we know as an aggregates company, requires a lot of different infrastructure. It requires the ability to recharge our vehicles, but I would love to get you a better answer from some qualified engineers who can answer that question.
Well, we know, of course, that EVs are heavier. I don't know as a percentage in terms of gross axle weight relative to the amount of freight that an electrified tractor trailer may be able to carry, how much heavier as a percentage. But I can't help but wonder if the design standards for a new modern rebuilt interstate segment is going to require a significant do-over within the next 10 or 20 years. And if it does, I mean, we, as we work on this committee, need obviously to be very mindful of that. I appreciate your attempt to answer the question. It is a subject that I'd like to know more about. And so if you, through your association, could be helpful, I'd be grateful. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Titus, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent Las Vegas and parts of southern Nevada. We have a lot of people coming into the area from California, from all over the world. So we have to accommodate moving them there and moving them around once they get there. But as we expand our access, we are building things in extreme heat. This is something we put our workers out there on the highways, on bridges, on all kind of infrastructure projects in temperatures that often are 115, 120 degrees even this year. It was a record year. Last week I joined several of my colleagues, mostly from the Southwest, but some from the South too, sending a letter to OSHA asking them to finalize rules to protect workers from this occupational exposure to extreme heat. Mr. Colvin, could you talk to us and tell the members of this committee as we consider this reauthorization what we might build in to protect these transportation workers so they can do their job and also be safe?
Yeah, I want to be sure that I give you a good answer to that. I know we have a couple of unions who are very involved in this. Laborers, I know in particular, have great expertise on this. So if I can get a more comprehensive answer and provide it to you or your staff, that would be helpful to me. I just don't want to misspeak on that.
I know we need cooling stations. I know we need rest periods, access to water, those kinds of things. But yeah, if you've got some kind of policy already in place, that would be helpful as we move forward.
Sure.
Another thing I want to talk about is safety. We've heard a lot about safety over the last couple of hours. In Clark County, which is Las Vegas, we've had over 200 and 30 fatal traffic accidents last year alone. I think we're on record now to beat that this year. Mr. Timon, I know AASHTO brought together a group last October, some of the departments of transportation from different states to talk about this issue of safety. It's not just roadways, it's in urban areas as well. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what y'all came up with and the value of having states work together on this issue and how we might incorporate it.
Well, thank you for that question and for recognizing the efforts of AASHTO and the state DOTs in this area. As I had mentioned earlier, it is the #1 priority for, I think, every state DOT in the country. AASHTO's president this year, Garrett Eucalito, has made his emphasis area for the year, one of them, safety, highway safety, making sure that we're equipping all states with as many tools and resources as possible to be able to address the safety crisis, which I think, as Mr. Larson said, is really a public health crisis. So we gathered in Houston this year for our second annual safety summit, where we convened state DOT experts across all disciplines, both on the infrastructure, design and maintenance side, all the way to the behavioral safety side, to be able to come together and identify what different states are doing to be able to drive that number down from the number of fatalities that we're seeing on our nation's highways. AASHTO has also passed a resolution 2 years ago reassuring every state's commitment to safety. We were one of the signatories to the Biden administration's National Highway Safety Strategy. And also, we continue to invest in proven safety countermeasures that have been identified by FHWA, making sure that we're demonstrating where states have been successful. I'll bring up one example, and it's more on the design side, which is roundabouts. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, roundabouts were kind of a niche area that you saw in just a handful of communities. You're seeing more and more states and localities adopt roundabouts because while they may seem quirky to drivers when they first see them, there really are a safer design module for a lot of intersections that we have across this country. And I do think that as we see more and more of those types of out-of-the-box thinking, we're going to see the number start to continue to decrease year after year. So thank you for that question.
No, thank you. That's encouraging. I hope you'll provide us that information as we move forward with this.
Absolutely.
I know people don't quite know how to do a roundabout when they first approach it, but I guess they'll learn. I wish you could do something with, as we increase the users on our roads, whether it's walking or wheelchairs or scooters, what about all these little rent-a-scooter motor things that you see all over town? I think that's got to be part of the mix as well. We can't just focus on the big modes of transportation.
Well, I do think that, when we think about safety, it has to be a holistic view of what safety means for the entire transportation system and for all users as well. So not just for drivers, for passenger vehicles or for commercial truck drivers, but also for cyclists and pedestrians, making sure that we're incorporating designs into our infrastructure network that protects all users, cyclists, motorists, pedestrians, commercial truck drivers as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. King-Hines, you're recognized.
Hafidane, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your time today. My district is the Northern Marianas Island. It's very remote and very isolated part of our country. But like every part of our country, we rely on a very functioning transportation system to efficiently move people and goods. And like everywhere else, our economy heavily relies on it. The Northern Mariana Islands receives annual federal highway funding through the Federal Highway Administration's Territorial Highway Program, and we seriously need these funds due to our geography, tropical climate, limited access to natural resources, workforce shortages. Highway construction is significantly higher in my district than it is in many of the contiguous states. This makes exemptions from Build America, Buy America requirements so crucial and critical to my district. The Marianas shares about $46 million with 3 other territories, American Samoa, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The IIJA has increased program funding annually, and the Territorial Highway Program is scheduled to be authorized over 49 million in FY26, and we receive about 10% of that distribution of funds, which equates to about $4.9 million. However, Mr. Chairman, through some administrative formula set in 1992, the Marianas and American Samoa, as I said, only receives 10% of this funding. No matter how you slice it, population, highway miles, and landmass, we should be receiving a little bit more. We're not asking for more, actually, just enough to be able to actually address our particular needs. So as this committee looks to reauthorize surface transportation program, I ask that we take a serious look at the territorial highway program allocations and require federal highways to use a rational criteria that actually allows each of the insular areas to address its unique and particularized transportation issues. This question is specific to Ms. Kavanagh because you've spoken about BABA, right? How could we further balance the need to buy America, build America with remote and rural communities' ability to access supply for construction materials? How do we improve that policy?
I'm not sure I'm equipped to address outside of the construction materials industry, and that's aggregates, asphalt binders, cement, cementitious materials. Because again, I think what this committee and others in Congress understood was we have geological and geographic limitations. And once you look at that and how you have to get materials where they need to go, it starts making more sense. What I don't know, and I think would be a very interesting question, is how does that apply to other materials and other goods across the board? I'd be happy to work with my association and others to look into that for you.
Yeah, I think I was looking for you to expound just in the construction industry in general, right? But we can have that conversation offline.
Would love to do that. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. I yield my time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Deschanel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses and the committee. It's an exciting moment. This is the biggest investment, the bipartisan infrastructure law since the Eisenhower administration, where he advocated for good-paying union jobs, a Republican president who once said, only a fool would get in the way of an American worker being able to organize. So different time. But I think in the context of what we look at this investment, we can't look at this as just the increase in 1 year's budget. This is 70 years of trying to reinvest. The civil engineers put out their annual report every year. I've been reading it for a long time. They put us at the bottom of developed countries because of our investment in repair. We haven't indexed our gas tax for inflation at a federal level. In California, where I'm from, we actually had the voters approve an increase, and they improved it overwhelmingly because they knew it was a good investment. So here's an opportunity to invest in a way that we haven't done for really 70 years that has multipliers throughout the economy. And it was the Biden administration that did this, and it's a real accomplishment. But this committee has historically been so bipartisan in a problem-solving way. Really appreciate the ongoing efforts to get this product out so that people can see it. People get good-paying jobs. Main Street gets the benefit of that economy. That, as a former small business owner, I know when the building trades were working and the operating engineers were working, I had more customers, just like executives. So we have a $786 billion backlog of road and bridge capital repairs, according to civil engineers. $435 billion needed just repairing existing roads, $125 billion for bridge repair, $120 billion needed for system repair. Now, in all this context, the area I represent in the San Francisco Bay Area, as the economy's grown, as Silicon Valley grew, we moved away from the coast, and as the American economy shifted to more of a Pacific Rim bi-coastal economy, the Port of Oakland, Mr. Dellinger, and I have a question for you and Mr. Colvin, in the 680 corridor, which is out the third tier of interstate highways in the Bay Area, in my district, we have a grant that's now being held up because we're trying to figure out what the consequences of the executive action have been on this grant. $166 million in the 680-580 corridor, where it's been headquarters to companies like Bank of America and Chevron over the years. It's also where Silicon Valley's employees live. In addition to that, because the Port of Oakland being the 4th busiest port in the country and one of the biggest exporters to China, so when we look at tariffs, we have to consider that as well. This investment that we're ready to start putting people to work for in the fifth largest economy in the world, what happens now? So Mr. Colvin, you know, this plan has been in our regional transportation plan since I was in local government. Every 2 years we review it. There's an urgency for it, just like the civil engineers say nationally, and now it's being held up. But what does that do to our workforce? Union and non-union, these are all good paying union jobs, but it goes to Main Street too. What does that do when we're in this uncertainty, where we're ready to start doing contracts and get our environmental review done? What's the consequences for American workers when we have these kind of cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the same way that short-term extensions of the program are you know, really harmful to spending in large, small and large projects. I think you know, the challenges extend, you know, to workforce and other arms. I think you know, sort of the absurdity of this is that you know, if you hold the majorities in the Senate, House, and the presidency, and you don't like some element of an existing law, then you have the opportunity to change it. You know, the notion that I think was said earlier that the vast majority of programs will be unaffected, I think that's inexcusable. The law is the law, and again, there's a path forward here if you don't like it, which is change it. But these disruptions are arbitrary, and they just hurt this country, that's all.
Mr. Dellinger, as you just commented, the 4th busiest port in the country, where your trucks like to go east, but we like to have them loaded going west so that we can export almonds and other products out, so we get that benefit. Can you speak to that briefly about the importance of getting these kind of projects done for your constituent groups?
As I've mentioned today on several occasions, the roads and bridges are our workspace, and anything we can do to improve is appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Collins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of want to take a little bit of different tact in what I want to talk about. And Mr. Dellinger, I like you, I've got about 40 years of experience. My dad really believed in child labor, so I've got a little bit of experience in the trucking business as well. And I kind of want to hit on a couple things. I probably sound like a basketball the way I bounce around, but if you'll bear with me a little bit. I want to tell you, and I saw your and several of y'all's testimony, and I kind of want to package all this and where I want to go. Talking about whether it was truck parking or driver shortages or just inflationary things that you've seen in trucking. And I want to ask you where tort reform would fit into this equation. Because when I think of things like, even like truck parking, you know, 10, 15 years ago, we parked at the consignee or the shipper. That way we'd be there to get loaded or we'd be ready to get unloaded. And now you can't do things like that because of the liability that is sitting out there. And with all the nuclear verdicts that you see going on, and I would just like to get your input on what you see as a specific, if you see a need for tort reform out there on the federal level. I know that we're running a lot of cases now. We're trying to move them to the federal bench in transportation with interstate commerce.
Let me go back to the parking. I think, you know, you're correct. You know, for many years, you were able to park at the consignee or the shipper. And what's happened, I guess in planning, a lot of times they don't plan for enough of the traffic that's coming in for their daily input or output. And so a lot of times that isn't possible. And then, as you mentioned, because of the liabilities, and you talked about inflation, and before I touch on tort reform, we've seen our insurance, our total insurance package, I'm not going to say strictly liability, increase since 2020, 42% over the last 5 years. And it is big for us, and a lot of it is because of, I'm going to say, nuclear verdicts or things that take place out in the industry and buying insurance. And the association has worked through the state federations, state by state, to change some of the laws. And I'm just going to mention one very quickly, and that's the seatbelt gag rule. You know, you can have an accident and be severe injuries, but the injuries maybe are caused by the person being ejected from the vehicle because they didn't have their seatbelt. But that's not admissible in court in the state of North Carolina.
Or anywhere.
There's a few states that it has been changed, but for the most part. But touching on the tort reform, I guess there's three things from a federal level. And that's making it a crime to stage accidents, putting an end to third-party financing. And if you don't know what third-party financing, I would challenge you to go to YouTube and look at a few years back, 60 Minutes did a episode on third-party financing. But what they do is they tell you it's a lot better investment than in the stock market, the returns. But the final being to move claims to the federal court. When I say claims, accidents, and maybe it's a certain dollar, whether it's a $750 million claim or $750,000 claim, which is the minimum insurance, or if it's $1 million. I know this would maybe tax the federal courts, but we need some type of protection in our industry from these runaway claims.
Yeah, no, and I agree, and I appreciate your response. And I want to tie that over to Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Timon, and I know you were talking about increases of 20 to 30% for every year that you don't get a project started or finished. And I know for a fact, road building contractors out there, they pad their bids by 30% just for the permitting lawsuits from the environmentalists that are going to come with any project. It doesn't matter what it is. And I would venture to say that that's probably a lot of the reason that you see a lot of times these projects are being delayed.
Well, I do think that there are projects in every state that are delayed by lawsuits associated with the NEPA process or other federal resource laws. And you're absolutely right. Every year that a project is delayed, whether it's because of that or other reasons, the cost of that project is going to go up. And certainly for the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen those percentage increases, year-to-year increase due to the impact of inflation.
Right, right. Mr. Chairman, I know I'm running over on time, but I just wanted to add in there, not only do we pay around $14,000, $15,000 federal excise tax on trucks, but we pay it on every tire we purchase. We have taxes when we buy our tags. We have sales tax in every state that we have, and that's federal and state. So trucking is very well taxed.
We've got 5 minutes into a roll call vote on the floor, so I want to try to get our last two questions in real quick. Mr. Garcia, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'll be brief. I know votes just got called. Obviously, I just want to say thanks to our witnesses. I was the mayor of Long Beach for 8 years, right before I got to Congress. We have a port. It's a city department. It's one of the largest seaports in the United States, and so I know that investment in infrastructure for goods movement, for rail, for highways, for multimodal transit, all of the above is really important. As we all know, a huge chunk of America's goods, 25% of them come through Long Beach and Los Angeles to the rest of the country. Investments like the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure law were so important to our port, to Long Beach, to the region, and to all the jobs that are happening, not just at home, but across the country, thanks to investments in ports and the supply chain. Wanted to just add really quick, I know two things. Mr. Dellinger, I was really grateful that you had brought up congestion briefly in your subcommittee. And I just wanted to let you know also that I think it's important that as we're looking at highways, that we're also looking at other ways that we can also take on congestion. Modernization of highways, rail, other types of multimodal transit, investments in sustainability. These are also ways to address our congestion issues. So I just wanted to mention that. And then also, just a shout out, of course, Vulcan is in Long Beach, really important for us at the Port of Long Beach. Thank you for that. And Ms. Kavanaughey, I just wanted to also just briefly, if you can just say how important the infrastructure investment has been to Vulcan and to the Port of Long Beach as I close my remarks.
For us, it allows us to move material in and then get it to infrastructure projects, public, private, residential, non-residential, across California. That efficient movement and having that pathway is essential for us to be able to distribute those materials.
Thank you. And in closing, Port of Long Beach received $280 million plus recently as part of the Port Investment Mega Grant. That's going to allow us to do a lot of on-dock rail programs and get, as you know, goods across the country faster. So thank you very much to our witnesses and to the chairman.
Mr. Kiley.
Good afternoon, Mr. Dellinger. As you know all too well, California has imposed a number of nonsensical policies and regulations on trucking that have wreaked havoc on the industry and on commerce. Some of those are already being pulled back now with the change of federal administrations. But could you just itemize a few of those that are still standing that perhaps could be pulled back by rescinding waivers?
I think it's important that the administration looks at the greenhouse gas 3, reopen that and look at those items. And I mentioned earlier today that basically CARB has been mandating things, and there's been a patchwork of other states that have been involved as well with CARB. But we operate in all 48 states, and basically we need the federal government to step forward and take control of our destiny.
Thank you. And you've also testified about how a lot of truckers are independent owner-operators who provide a vital part of our workforce and are a great example of the American dream, but how that model has come under siege both in California and nationally. Could you just talk through some of the ways that we might be able to push back on what's happening in order to preserve the independent contractor model?
Well, it's a very important model for our industry. It's been around for 90 years, and it allows people to own their own equipment. Basically what they do is they lease to companies, and basically that model is being challenged, that they're an employee and not a owner-operator, so to speak. So basically we need protection from a federal standpoint. We don't need, again, a patchwork of states that are telling us what needs to take place from that standpoint. And if you look at a lot of the companies that exist today, that's how they started. One truck begat 2, begat 10, so.
Thank you very much. We'll be working on both things, reining in CARB as well as protecting independent contractors. And then finally, Mr. Timon, I think the original witness from your association was from Georgia, and I was going to ask him about Waymo's expansion into Atlanta. But perhaps you could address the question sort of more generally in terms of how the likelihood that that autonomous vehicles will become more prevalent has affected your planning and the issues that we've discussed today.
You are right. Commissioner McMurray, who regrets that he is not able to be here because of the winter storm that the southern part of the United States is experiencing. I would say is that the state DOTs across the country are preparing for the growth of autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles within the transportation system as a whole. We're seeing more and more of that in certain urban areas with Waymo expanding operations in certain areas and other companies as well. But I would say just as importantly is just the inclusion of technology as a whole in what we do from a transportation network. It's not just autonomous vehicles or connected vehicles, but how we're incorporating technology into how we operate our nation's transportation system. Because rather than first looking at expanding capacity within our nation's highway infrastructure, state DOTs are looking at how to better operate the existing system using technology, and we're seeing more and more technology being incorporated into what state DOTs and localities are doing with their transportation network because it's a good use of the money and certainly is cheaper than, say, adding additional lanes. That might be a solution in certain areas, but we're certainly also looking at how we can better leverage technology to better utilize the existing capacity within our highway network.
Thanks. I think that's a very important point. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Seeing no other questions from any other member of the committee, This concludes our hearing for today. I want to thank each of our witnesses for your great testimony and for your answers to the many questions that have been presented. I think this is very, very helpful to have for the record as we embark on reauthorizing surface transportation. So thank you again. With that, the subcommittee stands in adjournment.